Okay, well, good morning, everybody. It's 9:30, and so today's hearing is now open. So welcome to day 12 of the hearings here in Epping. Can everybody hear me this morning? Including everybody at the back? Good. Okay, so for anyone who hasn't met me already, my name's Louise Phillips, and I'm the inspector appointed to examine the plan. And most people have now met Louise St. John Howe, the lady at the back, who is the programme officer. Could I just ask anyone with a mobile phone to turn it off or switch it to silent, please? And could I ask the council to remind us of the fire procedure and housekeeping matters?
Thank you, Madam. There is no planned fire alarm today, so if we hear the fire alarm, we need to exit the building the way you came in. If that exit is blocked, then if you use the exit to behind me here and down the stairs, the assembly point is on the green to the rear of the council civic office buildings. The toilets are located on the stairwells as you came into the building.
Thank you very much. Okay, so a familiar reminder now, but I need to do this at the start of every session. You can see the cameras in the room. The council is broadcasting this meeting live to the internet, and it will be capable of subsequent repeated viewing with copies of the recording made available upon request. By being present here, it's likely the recording cameras will capture your image and result in your image becoming part of the broadcast. You should be aware that this could infringe your human and data protection rights, and if you have any concerns, then please speak to the webcasting officer. And for the purpose of the recording, and just so that everyone in the room can hear, you need to activate your microphone when speaking by pressing the button and then turn it off afterwards so that other people can use theirs. So thank you very much. Without further ado, moving on to today's agenda, we're here to discuss three places this morning: P4, Policy P4 Ongar, P12, which is a collection of mainly smaller settlements, and P5 Buckhurst Hill. This afternoon, beginning at 2 p.m, North Weald Bassett and Thornwood. Now, my intention this morning is hopefully to discuss Ongar, then take a short break, and then the room will be reset for the remaining two policies. So if nobody has any immediate questions about how we're going to proceed, I'll just ask the council to introduce themselves, and then those on this side of the table, if you could say who you are and why you're here, essentially, if you're representing a site or what your interest is. Thank you very much.
Good morning, Madam. My name is Mark Beard. I'm a barrister instructed on behalf of the council. Today we have two participants for this session this morning, and that is Ms. Alison Blom-Cooper, who sits to my right, and to her right, Miss Chloe Salisbury from Arup.
Thank you. So perhaps if I start at this end of the table, thank you.
Thank you. Emma Walker from Phase 2 Planning, representing Blore Homes, who have land on the east side of Ongar to the south of London Road.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Lois Partridge from Saunders. I'm representing the landowners for Ongar R1.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Mary Dadd, representing Ongar Neighbourhood Plan Community Group and also representing Ongar Town Council.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Jim Padfield. We are farmers in the south and southeast of Ongar, now into our fifth generation. I was born and brought up in Ongar.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Martin Edwards, counsel for the Marden Action Group.
Thank you.
Good morning, ma'am. Sam Hollingworth, Stratton Parker, on behalf of City and Country.
Good morning, Rich Cook, Essex County Council, Planning.
Thank you very much. So, oh, sorry. Sorry, Mr. Sprunt.
Hidden away at the
see
end,
you hidden behind there, but I do know who you are.
David Sprunt, Essex County Council, Transportation.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay, sorry about that. So, turning straight to the agenda then, Policy P4 on Ongar. I have a few general matters set out there at the top, and so we'll begin with the first question, which is an overview of the constituent parts of the settlement. This is something that's come up quite a lot, and I don't know, it would just be useful, I think, for me if somebody could explain the relationship between the different parts of the settlement. So I've heard of Ongar, Chipping Ongar, High Ongar, Shelley. It might be just useful to set the scene. I don't know whether the council wants to do that or whether Mrs. Dadd, as representing the town council, might like to do that. I don't mind either way. Mrs. Dadd, would you like to do that, or shall I ask the council? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Thank you, Madam. Can I turn... paragraph 5.59 of the local plan submission version provides an overview of the settlement of Ongar. And if you look at map 5.8, which appears after page 135 of the local plan submission version, I think that might be helpful. The settlement essentially comprises three primary areas. Shelley, located immediately to the north of Epping Road, Chelmsford Road, which is the A414, which you can is identified on map 5.8. Ongar to the south of Epping Road, Chelmsford Road, and Marden Ash, which is situated just to the south of Ongar. Although the council recognises that the civil parish of Ongar extends to the east to include Greenstead, it doesn't consider Greenstead to be part of the town of Ongar.
Are the names of Ongar and Chipping Ongar essentially sort of interchangeable? Is that the name you'd give to the bit in the middle?
I think we originally called in the draft local plan we called it Chipping Ongar, and at the request of the town council we changed it to Ongar.
Thank you. Thank you. Sorry, Mr. Dad.
Sorry, can I answer that, please? It's very important to our community that the district know what our constituent parts are and their character. Hence, the local involvement is crucial. Unfortunately, so few officers live in the district, and so it has been picked up that not only their documents, but also those produced by consultants are listed with errors about Ongar and Chipping Ongar. So perhaps I could actually make it a bit clearer that Ms Blom-Cooper is quite correct that Shelley is actually north of the A414, but Chipping Ongar has been recognised as a district centre for Shelley, Marden Ash, Greenstead, Fifield, High Ongar and others for centuries, including as centre for the Ongar 100 and during the time of Ongar Rural District Council. The confusion clearly has arisen because Shelley didn't expand round the church and the hall, but it expanded just north of the Four Wants when the Rural District built council housing in the early 20th century. This part of Shelley has never been Chipping Ongar. There is a separation which is important to the setting of the historic town, i.e. the setting is in farmland and 19th century, with a 19th century railway to carry the agricultural products to London. The local community want development to reflect the character of the historic town and to enhance its historic core by promoting tourism. It's important, therefore, to get the constituent parts correct for the basis of the site selection, which considers the landscape characterisation and greenbelt purposes. In other words, what has actually come out of this is the separation between Chipping Ongar and Shelley is actually vital. And it's unfortunate the EFDC Greenbelt Review in Phase 1 and the LUC Greenbelt Phase 2 are listed with inaccuracies about what streets are in Chipping Ongar or in Shelley. And that has actually marred the whole site selection process. And it renders many of the sites having incorrect scores before even the sustainability factors are looked at if they're kept in the process. And I think that I do want to actually emphasise that there is a confusion because it is a civil parish of Ongar being the wider area. The town is quite clearly Chipping Ongar, as is actually shown in the town performer, which was produced for the local council, although towards the end of that also confuses Shelley being part of Chipping Ongar.
Okay, so just so that I'm clear, and you can talk about the sort of greenbelt implications and things later, but looking at this map, this bit here, are we agreed that that is Shelley?
That is Shelley.
And this below here is Chipping Ongar, apart from the bit at the bottom?
Well, the bit at the bottom is actually where the separation is with the rivers.
And that would be Marden Ash?
except that Ongar R5 and anything north of the borough is actually in Greenstead.
Okay.
So Greenstead also developed in the same way that Shelley did, rather than round by the hall and the church, it developed nearer to Chipping Ongar town.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful. Ms Walker.
Thank you. Whilst we recognise that the built-up areas of Ongar comprise what were once separate settlements of Chipping Ongar, Shelley and Marden Ash, we believe that growth over time has meant that these settlements are actually now contiguous and no longer separated by countryside. So Ongar has an identifiable centre which can be identified by the primary shopping area that serves the town and also the wider area. So we therefore agree with the Council's approach to define Ongar as one settlement, but we recognise the Neighbourhood Plan Group's comments that Ongar is very much made up of different areas.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr Padfield.
Thank you, Mark. Those that live in Ongar, born and brought up in Ongar, calling Chipping Ongar Ongar is a cardinal sin. You just do not do it. Chipping Ongar is separate from Marden Ash. It is separate from Shelley. Importantly, Shelley is in fact one of the most deprived. Sorry. Shelley is one of the most deprived areas in the council area. You know, I think it's in the bottom 40% in the country, and Marden Ash and Chipping Ongar are amongst the 10% richest areas in the country. So there's absolute reasons apart from anything else to separate those areas. And I know you said you didn't want to talk about the Greenbelt issue now, but I think it is in fact quite important.
Well, I'm content to talk about it now, but the reason for the agenda is there's a number of matters to get through. I don't want to talk about it twice, essentially. So if you want to make points now, then you can, but then I don't want to
I can make that point later, but okay. It will reinforce the point that we are dealing with three separate parts which come together to make up Ongar. Anybody with any knowledge of Ongar will stoutly defend that, and there are very good reasons why that is the case.
Thank you. Ms Partridge.
Thank you, Mum. I just wanted to add that although we recognise that the constituent parts are recognised historically, the Shelley area does contain Ongar's health centre, a primary school, and is a functioning part of the town. It also contains the leisure centre, and the gap between the two is so minimal to be down to approximately 55 metres along the extent of the high street, that it effectively functions, we believe, as a single settlement in current day terms. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, last point from Ms Dowd, and then I want to move on. I get the sense of the concern, and I'm sure it will come up through the more specific matters.
Yes, I'm sorry to disagree on this with my two ladies to the right. Neighbourhood Plan Group have been working closely with ACOM, and they actually have just done a draft design guide which supports the view of the importance of the distinct parts remaining separate. If you look at an aerial view, you see it's quite clearly separate, and the Greenbelt should, though it's Greenbelt thing, it should be maintained. Ongar residents are very proud of their historic town of Chipping Ongar. The last thing they want is for that to actually to be developed so it is contiguous with other settlements.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. If we could just move on now, because this has come up in quite a few of the representations. If the council could just explain in broad terms again its reasons for discounting sites to the east of Ongar.
Thank you, Madam. Yes, sites to the direct east of Ongar were discounted at stage 3 and 6.3. That's the stage where we identified candidate preferred sites of the site selection process due to being located in a less suitable strategic option. The reasons for that are documented in Appendix B 1.5.2, and that's EB 805I, page B763, and can be summarised as follows. The strategic option is the most harmful to the green belt relative to the other strategic options which were identified adjacent to Ongar. It was considered particularly sensitive in heritage terms. It's also sensitive to change in landscape terms, with limited potential for mitigation of harm to the landscape character, and the areas were subject to a higher flood risk than the other options.
Any comments on that particular matter? Mr. Padfield.
Sorry, I'll get this right eventually. We have a site to the east of Ongar, and which wasn't allocated, and we were told by the council that it wasn't allocated for the very reasons that you've outlined there, and exactly those reasons are your site to the east of Ongar is an area of higher flood risk, scores highly in terms of greenbelt, and because any development on this side of town would detrimentally affect the setting of the castle. And this was in an email immediately following the draft, the original draft plan. Yet in March 18, when the final assessments were made available to us after the submission plan was passed by the council, it turns out that the result of the assessment was completely different. The majority of the site is in flood zone 1, so it doesn't flood. It's unlikely to impact the setting of the scheduled monument, in other words, the castle, or the conservation area, or the Grade 1 listed building. And again, low density development is proposed, which reflects the character of the area, and therefore development is not likely to impact on the character of the area. And that is in the council's own documentation. So on one hand, you've heard what Alice and Bourne Cooper has said, and in their own documentation, they completely contradict that. Now, all right, that's what happened, and then you wonder why and how that's happened. And you have to, I'm afraid, Ma'am, go back, if I may, go back to the Greenbelt Review. Ongar was reviewed on the Greenbelt, obviously, as everywhere else was reviewed. And I know you've mentioned it earlier in your questions, and certainly the Inspector for Welling and Hatfield have mentioned it, that there was a need to fine grain assess the green belt. Ongar is in the peculiar situation where one half of the town, the west half, has been fine grained assessed. The allocations on the west half, by chance or whatever other reason, those allocations were directly assessed in quite almost to the boundary in the Greenbelt Review. On the east side, the Greenbelt Review was block reviewed. Huge areas were reviewed. There was no attempt at fine-grained assessment on the east side. So we had 5 areas, I think, on the east side, on the west side that were reviewed. Effectively, 1 on the east against the castle. Not only that, the description of those sites in the Stage 2 Greenbelt Review was as follows. And you've got a map of Ongar there. Perhaps you know, it would help you to follow this. Along the top of Ongar, there is the 414. On the description on the Greenbelt Review, Stage 2, the first parcel came down to the tributary of the River Road in the Cripsey Brook. It was assessed, and this is in the wording, it was assessed then as there was no other possible boundary to that parcel, quite correctly. The next parcel was assessed from the A113, which went south, up to the A128, which goes east towards Brentwood. That was assessed in the description of the site. All the description of the land activities exactly agreed with the with the written description in the site. On the plans, the parcel to the north was rolled down past the Cripsey Brook to the Stonedon Road, right? The parcel to the south was rolled up past the A128 again to the Stonedon Road. So the parcel in the middle, which wasn't described in Stage 2 Greenbelt Review, was missed out on the plan. That parcel in the middle, in Stage 1, was described as suitable for development in that east of the 1950s estate at Mardenash, Longfields Estate, south of the Stonedon Road, was a suitable development site. But because Stage 2 Greenbelt Review was manipulated, in my view, this didn't happen by accident, that situation that was shown in Stage 1 was obscured. So as far as Ongar is concerned, that is the reason.
Okay, thank you. We'll hear from the other two participants who want to speak, and then we'll ask the council to come back specifically on those points. Ms. Dad.
Thank you. I want to pick up on EFDC's assessment saying that it's a less suitable area to be developed as harmful to the green belt, the heritage, landscape character and the flood risk. And I would actually agree with Mr. Padfield's description about the fine graining assessment on the green belt on the west, but block looked at on the east. My analysis has shown that the first stage parcels to the west were subdivided in phase 1, but they weren't actually subdivided in the east. And by admission, EFDC workshop stated that the larger sites will have greater contribution than the smaller sites. The parcel to the east included aspects that were not going to be developed in any case, for example, Ongar Castle, Chipping Ongar Conservation Area, Great Stony Conservation Area, High Ongar Conservation Area, and listed buildings. The parcel was not looked at in smaller parcels away from these heritage assets, the settings of which were intended by landowners to be unharmed. By comparison, the site at R1, R2 have listed buildings within the parcel, and that was considered further. It was also stated that public consultation in 2012 preferred to build on the north or south of Chipping Ongar. However, the sectors offered did not include sectors to the east, which in any case was a very large area. As far as the landscape character is concerned, all the area around Ongar has high sensitivity to change, and the flood risk aspect, there is flood risk to the west and the east, and clearly the policies for EFDC do not include development within certain flood zone areas. At the draft stage, sites to the south were considered, but that at that stage was not the best direction for development. But that was changed between the draft and the submission. So we have two areas that were discounted as not the best direction for development, and one was actually then put in at Regulation 19 after the draft situation. There's been no transparency or justification based on factual evidence, and thus the site selection for Ongar must be considered to be unsound. There are too many faults right at the beginning and inconsistencies to make this site selection justifiable. I understand that EFDC need to deliver smaller sites within the first 5 years of the plan, and to this extent the numbers would be strategic, even though wide locations such as the civil parish of Ongar, but not necessarily individual sites. In Ongar, there are issues in that the sites to the east have been omitted unjustifiably at an early stage. That's not to say that they would necessarily be the chosen ones at the end. But the spatial location for sites is not justified or explained. The density is against the MPPF because it is out of character with the local historic towns. MPPF paragraph 47, bullet 5, says set own approach to housing density to reflect...
Ms Dad, sorry, I'm going to stop you there because we have discussed the density in general terms already. If you want to raise it in relation to any of the specific sites, that's fine, but I can still remember the discussion that we had about the density in general.
Yeah,
so if you sort of omit that bit for now.
My point there was relating to how the site selection might change if the density were to change.
Okay.
And we have suggested a way forward to conserve the character of the small town. We are very advanced with our local plan and working with landowners. So, is there anything else I wanted to say on that? No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms Walker.
Thank you. The Council's assessments of the sites in 2016 excluded the sites located on the eastern and southern sides of Ongar, including my client's site to the east, on the basis that they were considered to be less suitable strategic options, making reference to the historic setting and also the landscape sensitivity of Ongar. And then since that time, the Council decided to include sites on the southern side of Ongar, whilst recognising that they are a greater distance from existing town centre amenities, public transport and community facilities. So this approach of identifying 4 zones and then discounting one zone means that sites within that area or zone have been discounted without due consideration of the site's specific characteristics. So we fully understand and appreciate that development on the eastern side of the town would need to have regard to heritage assets, and Ongar Castle in particular, and also landscape impact as well. However, the zone to the eastern side of Ongar actually covers around 70 hectares of land, so it does need to be considered on a site-by-site basis. We have commissioned a heritage assessment in relation to our client's site to assess the impact of development on heritage assets, and our client's land is located at the northern extreme of this zone, and so it doesn't lie in close proximity of the castle. And the heritage assessment states in relation to Chipping Ongar Conservation Area that the site makes a very minor contribution to the semi-rural character of the conservation area, but does not contribute to the architectural or historical interest from which it derives its significance. And then with regard to the Great Stony Park Conservation Area, the heritage assessment concludes that the site has no function or historic relationship with Great Stony Park, nor do the views of the conservation area possible from within the site contribute to the appreciation of the building's original purpose as a built orphanage complex. So as a result, the site does not contribute to the significance of the conservation area. So the size of our representation site provides sufficient flexibility to ensure that development is sensitive to the setting of both conservation areas through a sensitive approach to the design for the site. It also benefits from access to the west, which means that the town centre facilities are within easy walking distance. So the Neighbourhood Plan Group is rightfully requesting that sites within this eastern zone are reconsidered, and it is our position that this work needs to be undertaken before the plan can be found sound. So our concerns in relation to allocated sites, and in particular with regard to the over-optimistic density calculations,
Are you going to speak in general terms about these sites? Because we'll
Yes,
come on
just
to the
very
sites.
generally. I
Okay.
just wanted to make that general point about the general sort of density calculations made in relation to the sites around Ongar, that we believe that additional sites will be required when the density is revisited, and just wanted to make the point that our sites or other sites can make a positive contribution in this regard. And I would also suggest that if additional sites are not found to be required at this stage, then a recommendation could be made to the council to include safeguarded or reserved sites for future development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll leave that for now. And again, there'll be opportunities to sort of raise any concerns in relation to the sites which have been proposed for allocation as we come to it. I have a couple of specific matters to just deal with first. Number 3 on the agenda relates to the primary shopping area and frontage. So if we could look at map 5.9 in the plan, which is about page 137. This has come up in the representations. I think I've asked about the relationship of the Sainsbury's store to the primary shopping area and frontage. Perhaps someone could tell me where that is in relation to the primary shopping area and frontage and what the consequences are of excluding it from these designations. Now, I think the position is that the community groups consider that it's used as an out-of-centre store and there's no desire to put it in, but it would just be helpful if I could understand the reasons behind it.
Yes, thank you, Madam.
Thank you.
The Sainsbury's store is
That one.
that building there.
Thank you.
And as set out in the Council's hearing statement on paragraph 146, page 64, the Council's not proposing that it's to include the Sainsbury's store in Ongar within the primary shopping area or the primary frontage. The reason for that is the store doesn't form a natural extension to the existing retail frontage or due to its location make a contribution to the retail character of the area. And that is supported by the Town Centre Review, which was undertaken in 2016, which is EB 1008, which recommended at section 4.3.4, pages 46 to 47, that Ongar's existing key frontage should be retained as the primary frontage in this plan.
Thank you. Does anyone here have a different view? The council? No. Thank you. Okay. So, number 4, a couple of sort of general modifications. The council has proposed some other modifications that we've got here this morning in response to the questions on the agenda, but these were available before this meeting. So, a modification to Part E1. Right? No, to Part E. D1, I think. Is it? Should be D, yeah. Okay. A modification to refer to the expansion of primary secondary schools as part of the infrastructure requirements. Now we had a general discussion about this yesterday. It's a common sort of addition, if you like, to most of the place policies to reflect the need for development to contribute proportionately towards the items of infrastructure listed in the plan. Now we did have a general discussion, which I'm not going to repeat now, yesterday, about how the council will review its wording in relation to infrastructure requirements to ensure that it's more flexible so that only developments that actually require a contribution to a specific item will have to make it. So it's not intended to be the case that every development and every settlement will contribute to every item of infrastructure listed. I think the County Council's position with having the need to contribute to primary and secondary schools, again, was intended to flag up the need up front for those things to be considered, but it would still leave room on a time-specific and site-specific basis to consider the need for those contributions. That's broadly correct, a summary of our conversation yesterday. So that's the context in which it's proposed to add contributions to primary and secondary school places to that list. So in that context, does anyone have any concerns about that modification? Mr. Padfield, you've got your board up.
Yes, please.
Sorry, microphone, please.
Sorry, I remember it once.
Okay.
It's the modification on the air quality on the 414. Can I
Okay.
address that one?
Well, no, if we first of all just check that everybody's content with the schools one, and then we'll
Okay.
move on to air quality, because I'll ask the council to explain that one first of all. Everyone content on schools? Yeah. Okay, and then I think what Mr. Padfield wants to come on to is there's a modification proposed after paragraph 5.69 relating to, well, it might not be this one actually, relating to the potential effect of changes to the recreational zone of influence for Epping Forest SAC. Could I just ask the council to explain that, please?
Yes, certainly, Madam. The intention of that is to provide flexibility, recognising that the zone of influence for recreational impacts on the forest may change. As you know, at the current time, the zone of influence from the visitor survey is some 6.2 kilometres, but we are undertaking a further visitor survey this summer, so the zone of influence may change. So we, in discussions with Natural England, have proposed an amendment to recognise that that may happen, so that if it is amended, any mitigation strategy which relates to recreational pressure in accordance with policy DM2, which I know we're going to discuss next week, will use the most up-to-date zone of influence which can be found on the council's website. So we hadn't originally included a policy in for Ongar because it was outside the 6.2 kilometres, so it's just recognising, making sure that if the zone of influence changes, we can apply the mitigation strategy as appropriate.
Is there any need for that to be reflected in the policy wording as well as in the supporting text?
Yes, I think it would be helpful to do so.
But obviously it would need to be in the sort of flexible terms.
Yes, absolutely.
Maybe when we come on to discuss next week, I mean, presumably that requirement isn't going to apply to all, it's not a standard across all the settlements, is it? There'll be specific settlements.
I think it will apply across to all the settlements because the zone of influence may change to cover all of the settlements within the district. We know, for example, that the National Trust have just done a piece of work for Hatfield Forest, which is a much smaller forest to the north, and they're saying the zone of influence is 11-point-something kilometres. So it is not beyond bounds possibility that it might change.
Okay, well, if we sort of highlight for now the need to sort of reflect that appropriately in policy, but then maybe when we come to next week to consider whether each place-specific policy where it's not certain is the right place for it, or whether it's something that needs to be in the DM policy. Useful. Thank you. Mr. Padfield, sorry.
Thank you, Ma'am. It wasn't quite that point, but it was the one reflecting the air quality around the A414, the first modification.
Sorry, Mr. Padfield, can we come on to that in relation to Site R1? Because we will get to that. These are modifications proposed in relation to the site-specific matters. Okay, and finally, in relation to the general modifications, an additional modification is required to paragraph 5.63 to reflect the number of sites allocated. Is that okay?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Okay, did anyone else want to raise any other matters that are relevant to the whole of the area before we move on to the site-specific issues? Ms. Dadd.
Thank you. I wanted to raise concerns about infrastructure concerns. Is this the right place to raise it generally? We've already, the sites, I've already said that the sites around Ongar are relatively small, but overall they have a big impact and a big increase to the population. Chipping Ongar, for example, has less than 1,500 electors and is most easily harmed if there is, not required, not the relevant infrastructure made. CIL is not due until after April 2021, I believe, and Ongar really needed to benefit from that spending in Ongar itself. But the delivery of developments is within the first 5 years. So, and having reread D1, there has a let-out clause, as far as I can see, to make it difficult to achieve some of the IDP, in particular open space, town park, that sort of thing, which amounts to 14 hectares of essential IDP. How is the local plan going to make sure that is delivered in Ongar within S106, and similarly with the preschool? And what input and when are the local councils and neighbourhood plan groups going to have a say in about the choices of the IDP, of the infrastructure development, and the type of infrastructure as identified, relating to location, type of facility, and other aspects? And how is localism and the Neighbourhood Plan Act being carried out in practical terms?
Thank you. Just to flag up, not that I won't ask the council to address it now, but there is a session on infrastructure next week in which specific concerns were raised about Ongar, and I think I've put on the agenda to use Ongar as an example of how the council intends to address those issues, or how we can have confidence. So it will come up again, but as you've raised it, if I can ask the council to sort of address it in broad terms now, and they might do so again next week. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. I'd just draw your attention to the Infrastructure Delivery Plan topic paper, which is EB1101C, which provides a high-level framework for apportionment and the pooling arrangements to be taken forward for key pieces of infrastructure across the district. As well as a framework for apportionment, the paper provides more information on the external funding sources outlined in the Infrastructure Delivery Plan, including the work which is currently ongoing to progress and secure funding, and any risks of funding not being in place and what the contingency measures are for this. And it also considers the potential role of the Community Infrastructure Levy should the Council decide to pursue its introduction. And I should just stress that no decision has been made by the Council on Community Infrastructure Levy at this stage.
Maybe next week, perhaps we could have a sort of maybe a little bit of a more detailed, practical example of how the use of that document, the application of that document, even though obviously accepting that not everything can be certain at this stage, a bit of how you're going to use that document to give us a bit of a practical idea. That would be helpful, I think. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to the site-specific issues now. So first of all, we're going to look at Ongar R1 and R2, which is the West Ongar Concept Framework area. So again, to begin with, just to get a little bit of a flavour of what's going on, if I could ask the council and also perhaps Ms Partridge, as a representative of one of the landowners here at least, to just give us an idea of the progress with the framework plan preparation and what's going on at the moment in relation to that site.
Thank you, Madam. I think we also have City and Country who are here, the other landowner as well, Mr Hollingworth. So the Council's making good progress with the preparation of the framework plan. Progress includes several meetings between council officers and the two site promoters to progress the concept framework plan. An agreed statement of common ground has been signed and agreed by both parties. That's ED 38. And the key points relate to an agreement that the two site allocations will be the subject to a single framework plan, that meaningful engagement will be undertaken with the local community to inform the preparation of that plan, and that the sites comprising the area are available, viable and deliverable for the proposed number of dwellings within the plan period as set out in the Housing Implementation Strategy Update and its appendices. That's EB 410 and 410A. And we're in discussion around a planning performance agreement to set out a coordinated programme, and that will continue to provide an effective tool for joint working between the parties to ensure the timely production of the framework plan and delivery of the development.
Thank you, Mum. Just to concur really with what the Council has said, we are in, both parties are in constant dialogue with each other and have had meetings with the Council. As you'll see, we've submitted an agreed draft master plan which is appended to our respective hearing statements, and that shows that the sites could be delivered jointly or separately, recognising the need for a coordinated approach. As the Council has set out, a statement of common ground has been agreed and signed by both parties with the Council, which sets out a range of issues on which all parties agree, including that a coordinated and coherent approach will be taken to production of a concept framework plan for the whole site. We note that the Council only relatively recently issued their guidance on the preparation of concept framework plans. That was in February 2019. So at the moment we've been focused on the local plan examination, but we will be turning our attention to that post the examination conclusion. The Statement of Common Ground also set out a number of key milestones, and one of those again is to agree a planning performance agreement in May or June 2019. The Council has issued a draft PPA to us, and again, once the hearings have concluded, we'll be turning our focus to that as well. And then just to add really that both parties have been commissioning technical work to support the preparation of an application on the site. Thank you.
Thank you, Mum. I won't repeat what Ms Partridge has just said, other than to say that we entirely agree with that analysis of the position. In terms of the additional technical work that has been undertaken, I would emphasise that also includes an update to access appraisal work, which was initially taken in respect of R2 in isolation, but now considers R1 and R2 combined, and that update is referred to in our hearing statement. Thank you.
Thank you. Stad.
Sorry, me again. I'd just like to ask what point are the council and the developers going to include local people and involvement of the Ongar Neighbourhood Plan Community Group? Is it going to be wait until it's well advanced? Because we do have local knowledge and would like the opportunity to be present to see what's going on. We have got ACOM who've just now sent us our draft design code, which is quite detailed. We have got emerging draft policies, and we also, other developers have talked to us. We've had no communication from the land agents for R1, R2. And the last time we spoke to EFDC, we were told that it would wait until it was actually a fait accompli, and then we'd be able to have our say. I don't really think that's really in the spirit of localism and Neighbourhood Planning Act.
Thank you. Council.
Yes, thank you. The council took a report to the Cabinet on the 18th of October 2018, which sets out the arrangements for local plan implementation. That approved the draft strategic master plan and concept framework note for consultation and sets out the terms of reference. There is a very clear structure which I think is actually mirrored partly in the local plan here under the planning process. for strategic master plans, whilst it's intended for on page 35, whilst it's intended that the concept frameworks are a slightly lighter touch than the master plan work, there is intention to have full engagement at an early stage. Whilst we note that the master plan has been attached, I don't think the council have yet considered it and given formal comments back. But as soon as we have, we will be talking about a programme of engagement at an early stage before we get any further with the work. And that will be part of the planning performance agreement and the way in which we're going to structure. So it's the report to Cabinet is EB 133.
Ms Partridge.
Thank you, Mum. Just to confirm that the Statement of Common Ground sets out that the parties agree that the concept framework will include meaningful consultation with the local community and other stakeholders. So we are committing to doing that through that process.
Thank you. Mr Padfield.
Can I return to the issue that I was putting before? And it wasn't really directly this is air quality on the 414. It wasn't directly at 1 and 2, R1 and 2, but it was a general point I'd like to make. When this site was originally chosen as suitable, it must have been patently obvious that there was an issue with air quality along the A414. As I understand it, and I'm a farmer, not a planner, that when sites are allocated, that both the pros and the cons of the site should be made known. It was patently obvious that this was an issue with these two sites. But yet, when you look back through the allocations or non-allocations around Ongar, sites which were a long way away from the A414, a long way away from any main road, were said to have issues with air quality. We have a site at the Stag Public House on the A128 that has the A128 on two sides of it, and the Stonedon Road and a junction. And again, no mention of air quality. So again, I come back to you to the initial look at these sites. I don't believe they've been fairly assessed. I believe there's been an agenda where sites have been chosen and their difficulties have been ignored until you come to this late time in the planning inquiry when somebody says the obvious, you know, what about air quality? Why you haven't even tested it? Okay. And this is not good enough.
Okay.
It's not good enough.
Thank you. Can we just hear from the council a little more about the nature of the air quality issue in relation to the concept framework area? If we could just hear a little bit more about the issues there, and then maybe to give us some confidence that those issues are being considered and are capable of mitigation.
Yes, thank you, Madam. I assume you're referring to your item 1.3 on the agenda, the implications of site segregation. Yes, as part of the site selection process, the council considered the impact of air quality on all the proposed site allocations. In relation to ONG R1 and ONG R2, the assessment concluded that the sites lie within an area which was identified as being at risk of poor air quality from the A414, but that risk could be mitigated or reduced through good design. The council considers that any buffer or other mitigation measures can be delivered alongside the number of homes proposed in the local plan submission version. This is supported by the indicative net capacity assessment for the site, which includes sufficient flexibility for such design features within the assumptions made. To ensure the impacts of air quality arising from the A414 are appropriately addressed, the council proposes an amendment to the development requirements in Appendix 6 for the West Ongar Concept Framework Area Plan under on-site constraints, and that's the Amendment 1 in the handout that was circulated this morning. Madam, I don't know if everyone's had an opportunity to see that, but what we're proposing is to set out that the site is identified as being at risk of air quality impacts due to its proximity to the A414. Development proposals should mitigate air quality impacts through careful design and layout.
And perhaps just to address Mr. Padfield's wider point, how was the issue of air quality sort of taken in the round with the other issues that you've considered? I think we're hearing that obviously there are sites that are away from these risks, so why is it preferable to allocate a site that you know is subject to these risks and require mitigation?
In general terms, air quality was obviously something that we gave serious consideration to, as I said, for all the sites in the district, and it was one of the factors that was taken into account when determining whether or not to allocate sites. At the end of the day, the air quality issue was not the determinant factor for which sites got allocated within ONGA.
But it could have been if the air quality was considered severe enough. It was in the council's position. It was considered, and it was appropriately weighed. The risk considered. Okay, thank you. Sorry, can you? Is it Mr. Edwards? I can't see your name. Sorry, and I can't remember everybody's name. That's okay.
Thank you, Ma'am.
Hollingworth, thank you.
Yeah, just Ms. Blubbins-Cooper there about air quality assessment not being the determinant factor, and I would suggest that that is an entirely appropriate approach when that factor can be mitigated, as clearly it can here. We're not within an air quality management area, I don't believe. The only two air quality management areas in the district are within Epping itself, I understand. Clearly, air quality is an issue to be addressed, but it can be mitigated. I'd draw your attention, Ma'am, to the fact that the plan we've shown of our proposed developable area includes a buffer to the northern side, seeks to account for that. And whilst I am not an air quality expert, I don't profess to be, our experience elsewhere is that NO2 and PM10 levels, the traffic exhaust emissions, which are the subject of the concern, they tend to be very localised and drop very quickly as one moves away from the road itself. So actually, we're not talking a buffer of hundreds of metres or anything like that that's required. Thank you.
Thank you, Mum. Just to concur with my colleagues' comments, really, but also to say that our preference would be to have an access point onto the A414, and if that were the case, that could help to slow down traffic, which could reduce air quality impacts as well by ensuring a steadier flow of traffic through the area. Thank you.
As you've mentioned that, and it won't preclude you from raising your points, but perhaps in order to move the agenda on as well, we can consider them both together. Could we just consider the justification for requiring the single point of access? Again, as given that the landowners do seem to be working together to produce a complementary framework, is it justified to require a single point of access to facilitate a comprehensive scheme, or are there traffic implications? And the other thing I just wanted some comments on. If Mr. Hollingworth, you say you've done some traffic work. I mean, I'd have a walk around this site yesterday, and just want some comments on the proximity of the access on the eastern side, on the high road, to the roundabout.
Yeah, happy to, Ma'am. Yes, that has been considered, and also we've appended our assessment, which has been produced by specialist transport consultants as to the optimum location for this access. And as that assessment concludes, it's entirely feasible to provide that.
So if I could just ask the council to comment on the single point of access issue.
Yes, just by way of clarification, can I say that the air quality assessments that were undertaken for all the sites in the district were undertaken by an air quality specialist, just to clarify that point. In terms of the justification for requiring a single point of access, the preference for access off the high street is based on advice we were given from Essex County Council as the highway authority. This includes the principle of avoiding prejudicing the functionality of the A414 as a strategic east-west route where possible. including avoiding new and upgraded access points off the A414 within close proximity of existing roundabouts, such as the nearby Four Wants roundabout. As we've set out in paragraph 150 of the Council's hearing statement, which is page 66, it's considered that it's justified to require a single shared vehicle access for ONG R1 and ONG R2 to adequately address placemaking objectives and to reduce congestion and safety concerns in relation to the A414. The policy requirements set out in Appendix 6 also allow for access from the A414 in the event that an acceptable access solution from the High Street cannot be found, and that flexibility supports the deliverability of development at ONG R1 and ONG R2.
Sorry, can you just
Sorry.
take me to where that flexibility is? It's this Appendix 6,
Yeah.
page 107.
Sorry, I haven't got it open either.
Okay.
It's page 107.
Yep.
Yeah.
Madam, if you turn to the very bottom of page 107, it starts, should this, and then if you flip over the page into 108, not be possible, opportunities to provide
Okay.
vehicular access, etc., etc.
Thank you.
Can I just finish? So the council acknowledges that the site promoter has undertaken some initial assessment of site access constraints in respect of ONG R1 and ONG R2. However, this is considered to be high level in nature and does not provide sufficient detail to evidence that a second point of access of the A414 is safe or required. The council therefore considers that this issue can most appropriately be addressed at the planning application stage or through the concept framework. I think ideally we'd want it done then. And the council at this stage considers that the preference for the single point of access remains justified, as explained in the hearing statement at paragraph 150.
Thank you. Ms Partridge and Ms Dad.
Thank you, Mum. We do not agree that a single access is appropriate, and we find that the wording in Appendix 6 is overly restrictive at this stage, particularly as the Council has just said that sufficient detail has not been carried out yet, and we would request that the wording of Appendix 6 is amended to provide a more flexible approach so that that detail can be agreed in the concept framework plan. We suggest that 2 access points could be provided through the site, and the layout of the site could either allow through traffic, putting in place a range of measures to remove any risk of rat running, such as traffic calming, planting and narrowing of the streets, or equally, as shown on our indicative submitted master plan, we could have it as 2 separate accesses with just permeability through the site for cycle and footway. The Council raises concerns about congestion and safety on the A414. We have had a highways impact statement prepared, and this was submitted to the Council to support our Reg 19 representations. And that identifies that activity at both sides of a carriageway should make drivers more alert to potential conflict points, which helps to reduce speeds and provides substantial benefits to other users of the highway network, such as pedestrians and cyclists. And this is particularly relevant on this stretch of road because of the proximity of the school and bus stops on both sides of the road. So by having an access point off the A414, it provides a range of benefits to other users, not just the car. We note that the Council goes on to recognise that an acceptable access solution could be allowed from the 414 if it cannot be delivered from the High Street, in which case we would suggest that at this stage flexibility should be retained. And yesterday that approach, I think, was agreed for the Waltham Abbey master plan. Thank you. Thank you.
Ms Dad.
Thank you. My concern is that I don't know that EFDC have considered the impact on the A414 as much as they should have done with respect to development at Harlow and East Herts. It is the strategic east-west route. It has got considerable congestion at the moment and is likely to increase. And mitigation on this particular site is going to mean the usable area is going to be less, which could push up the density because they are specifying a minimum number. And not only with that, we're also concerned about the density because that particular site will need to provide green corridors because of the nature of the grassland for almost a century on R2, Bowes Field. And what about the net biodiversity gain? How is that going to be accommodated? So by putting an extra pressure on there, it's making this site look more and more unfeasible.
Thank you. Mr Hollingworth, just a brief point, and then we're going to come to the council, and I want to move on to the other sites.
Thank you, ma'am. I will be brief. I will endeavour not to repeat the points Ms Partridge has already made, but just on Appendix 6, appreciate that council officers may wish a decision maker to infer from that there is flexibility, but I'm conscious that the MPPF requires that policies do give a clear steer to a decision maker, and our concern is that, as currently worded, it won't, and there will be a danger a future decision maker thinks that they are required to stick to this single access point. And I'm just also going to raise the point made by the council in their hearing statement where they give 2 reasons why a single access is preferable. The first, as Partridge has already addressed, but the other one is raising concerns as to whether a coherent development could be delivered if there were 2 points of access. I can't accept that 2 points of access would give rise to any concerns with whether a coherent development could be delivered. It's far from unusual for a single development site to have more than one access point and for development to be a comprehensive development across the site. And there's nothing to suggest that a coherent development of this site is dependent on there being a single access point.
Thank you. The council want to come back briefly on any of the points that have been raised there, because I think the in relation to R4, we're going to hear about the For Once roundabout again. So
I think just to say that we would be happy to discuss this as part of the preparation of the concept framework and then to consult on a master plan which showed options maybe with and without, but we need to be guided by advice from the Highways Authority on this point.
thank you. Okay, we're going to move on now to the other residential sites. Now I've got some specific questions about particular sites which I want to deal with first. I'm conscious of the time. I want to make sure I've answered the questions I need answers to, and then there'll be an opportunity to discuss any of the other sites if needs be. So Ongar R4, and concerns have been raised in relation to the capacity of For Once roundabout, and I think the council had suggested that there was a highways scheme plan to improve capacity at this roundabout. And my question is, can you give us a little bit more information about that, and will it be delivered in time to support the development on this site? Are any amendments required to the policy to ensure that the timings are complementary?
Thank you, Madam. The Council has confirmed at paragraph 154 of the hearing statement that a detailed highway scheme has been developed to improve capacity at the For Once roundabout at junction 12 of the A414 as part of a package of schemes along the A414 Harlow to Chelmsford corridor. This scheme does not rely on contributions from developments in Ongar, as it's been fully funded by Essex County Council and the South East Local Enterprise Partnership through the Local Government Fund, with scheduled delivery in 2021. This demonstrates that Ongar 4 is deliverable in respect of its impact on this roundabout.
When is R4 intended to come forward?
I haven't got the trajectory in front of me, but I can find out from colleagues behind.
Thank you. Mr Sprunt.
Just a clarification, because there has been an update in respect of the For Once scheme. And in fact, it was part of an overall, what we call a route-based strategy running from Harlow to Chelmsford, where we had a number of interventions along the whole route, one of them being the For Once roundabout. Unfortunately, the scheme, which was funded partially by the South East LEP and Essex County Council having to make up the remainder of the funding, we have had a review of our budgets in light of the recent settlements, and it falls under one of a number of schemes that is no longer being taken forwards at this time. So the developments within Ongar would have to now contribute to the funding of a scheme at the 4-1 roundabout.
Is this something that you'd been able to make the council aware of?
It's only a recent decision of Essex County Council that we're no longer progressing schemes.
Okay, well, in fairness to the council, I think it would be useful to maybe give an opportunity to discuss that outside. 'Cause that's obviously quite something significant to make them aware of at today's session, and perhaps not before the session. So perhaps if we'll leave that for now, because I don't think we'll be able to. Certainly, I won't be able to take it any further in this session. But I think, to be fair, that's something that you could have an opportunity to discuss outside of the meeting. So that it isn't left, though, as a result, I think perhaps initially if we could have some sort of written statement as to the implications of that as you see it for this allocation and any of the others. But yeah, I think it's only fair to let you have some proper time to consider that.
Thank you, Madam. I'm grateful
Thank
for
you.
that. Just in relation to the question you just asked about delivery, at the moment it's in the trajectory for between 2022, 23 and 25, 26.
Thank you. Okay. Right. We'll move on to R6. I again have a specific question about R6, which isn't traffic related, so we can deal with that now. Issues have been raised about the significance of Dyers and Marden Ash House in respect of marking the entrance to Ongar. So perhaps again we could just hear about what the significance of those buildings are and what they are. I had a quick look yesterday. I drove past. Obviously, they look like large houses. I don't know if anyone local wants to talk about what their significance is and whether they are whether they have a particular significance for marking any entrance or if they're significant for other reasons, and whether the criteria in Appendix 6 is sufficiently specific to recognise that significance. Thank you. So I start with the council.
Yes, thank you, Madam. Given the size of the site and the limited number of dwellings which are anticipated to be delivered on the site, the council considers there is sufficient flexibility for a scheme to come forward which conserves or enhances the significance of the Grade 2 listed Dyers and Marden Ash House. That's set out within paragraph 156 of the council's hearing statement, which states that a capacity assessment was undertaken as part of the site selection work. This took account of the Grade 2 listed Dyers and Marden Ash House, which resulted in the indicative capacity and associated density being reduced for the site in order to minimise the risk of harm to the assets or their settings and to minimise impact on the amenity and character of this part of the settlement. The council's been advised by the promoter of the site that a specialist heritage consultant has been appointed and that their initial advice confirms the council's assessment that any impacts on Dyers and Marden Ash House can be appropriately mitigated. It should also be noted that Historic England has not raised any objections or recommended any modifications to the local plan in regard to this proposed allocation in its statement of common ground with the council, which is ED 24.
Thank you. Mr. Edwards.
Ma'am, some of what I say spills over into the observations regarding the Greenbelt allocation itself, but it does call into question just how thorough any assessment, if there has been one, in terms of listed building value, has actually been undertaken by the council. It may be that this information isn't before you, but in the autumn last year, a Freedom of Information Act and Environmental Information Regulations request was made to the council, regarding these two sites and works that had been done, including works that had been, or discussions they had had with site promoters. And the response contains no information whatsoever in relation to these matters. So I'm left wondering whether or not the work that was done that led to the inclusion of R6 in the local plan at the last minute is work that has been done after the decision was taken. In other words, ex post facto rationalisation. We've not seen any assessment from the council. We've not seen any assessment from the specialist heritage consultant that apparently has been appointed. It is unfair for us to comment on documents that we have not been provided with, despite the fact that we did request to see all the documents regarding R6 and R7. So at this stage, it is difficult, if not impossible, for us to counter what Ms. Blom-Cooper has said.
Well, could you perhaps express what your concerns are?
In the simplest of terms, it's our view, quite frankly, that certainly in the case of Marden Ash House, which is grade 2 starred after all, and which is of course a very, the second highest grading that you can have, and indeed grade 2's listed building, having housing at the densities proposed will impact on the setting of those listed buildings. There's no assessment, as I can see it, in Appendix 6 of what the settings are. There's just bland statements about saying that they will not affect the setting or could be developed in a way that would not affect the setting. There's no assessment of what the setting of the listed building is. So how can we judge that? We can't. There's no attempt made to undertake the preliminary step of saying what is the significance of the heritage asset and its setting, how far is it setting?
Thank you. Could the council comment on that? So rather than sort of telling us what has been done, are you able, is there information, or are you able to tell us what those buildings and their settings are, what is significant about those buildings, and what the development must do to avoid harm to the significance of those buildings? So I guess what we want some comfort is you can put in the policy that it must avoid harm to the setting, but in order to know whether that's possible, we need to know what that building is significant for.
I'm just looking out the settlement capacity study that was done and what account was taken of the two listed buildings in relation to the quantum of housing proposed for those sites. So I'm not able to come back with chapter and verse. Stonebomb Properties, who are currently the promoters of the sites, unfortunately were not the promoters at the Reg 19 stage. So although they've submitted a hearing statement, it hasn't been accepted into as for part of this matter statement. They have shared it with us, and it's that on that basis that I'm reporting to you that they are undertaking the technical assessment work to show that the settings of those buildings will not be affected by any proposed development. And as I reported earlier, Historic England have not raised any concerns about the allocation.
If I may just reply to that, that does suggest to me, from what has just been said, that the assessment undertaken by the site promoter was post the examination draft being submitted. Am I correct in that?
Yes, in relation to the site promoter, but all the sites were assessed in terms of their capacity and their deliverability, including advice from our own internal conservation advisors before the allocations were proposed.
Okay. Again, I want to carry on with things that we're not going to get to the bottom of. I want to try to conclude the agenda and get through the other sites. So perhaps what we could ask the council to do is again to provide us with a short written note in relation to the work that informed their site's capacity assessment and how heritage issues were taken into account. Thank you. Are you going to raise a different point, or is again in relation? Okay, Ms. Dadd.
Thank you. Very briefly, I have actually been to Dyers and paced out it is 14 metres from the bay window of the listed building to the boundary. And as you know, the settings are not a defined situation. The ground slopes away, so it's undoubtedly that quite a considerable amount of that plot will affect the setting.
But again, what I want to know, just to be specific about what I want to know, is that it depends what the building is significant for. Why that building is significant will affect what. Placing housing in the setting of one building isn't the same as placing housing in the setting of another building. So I think what I need is some understanding of what is significant about those buildings and how the proposed development would affect, if it would, that setting, whether that could be mitigated.
If it would help, we have commissioned ICOM to do the Ongar Design Guide. We had a draft which only came to me yesterday, and that has got an indication of the characterisation of Marden Ash. It has other information as well. I can submit that to you if that would be useful.
I think it would be more useful, and as I've asked I'd quite like the council's view, if you want to provide that information to the council so that they can use it in informing their view, then that's fine, but I'd like to hear from the council, I think. Okay, thank you. We're going to leave that point now. Just as a general point, I've noticed when you're looking at the sort of heritage entries in Appendix 6, it sounds like a minor point, but as you're going through making various amendments, lots of them refer to sustain or enhance. So if we can sort of update that to the statutory wording. Okay. Thank you. In relation to R7, the specific question is, do the development requirements in the appendix fully reflect the presence of trees on the site, and is the capacity of the site at 17 dwellings overestimated? And again, just for my own benefit, if you could just tell me in talking about this site, how you get in, because I did go and have a look. Yesterday. It's quite difficult to see it. I just wondered where the sort of intended access point might be. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam. The Council considers the indicative capacity of the site reflects the local context, which includes the presence of trees and hedgerows, and that the capacity of the site is not therefore overestimated at 17 homes. The development requirements in Appendix 6 reflect the presence of tree preservation orders on the site. In recognition of the presence of other trees on the site, the Council proposes an amendment, which is Amendment 2 on the sheet of amendments that was circulated this morning, to include an additional development requirement under trees, and that is that development proposals should take into consideration the amenity provided by the existing trees and hedgerows on the site. They should seek to minimise their loss, including through sensitive layout.
Thank you, Mark. This is our site, and I have much sympathy for Mr. Edwards' clients. It is a good site, but as with many sites around Ongar, we have a long list of mitigation, quite rightly, but the density hasn't been changed to take account of that mitigation. A council can't say that we've got to protect all the trees. We want to protect all the trees, but still keep the same number of houses, 17. We end up with inappropriate housing in that situation. And this is not just our site. This has happened all around Ongar, and it's not acceptable, really. We've planned this site, and we can get 17 in there. Obviously, we could get more than 17 there. Totally inappropriate houses for the situation. I totally understand the problems my neighbours are concerned with there. And, you know, I've lived all my life. I've lived within 5 yards of Ongar 6, and I know that site. We farm that land. And the proposal there by the council for those numbers are totally unacceptable, totally unacceptable. And this all comes back to the strange decision by the council, not in their Greenbelt assessment, not to assess under Purpose 3. I just can't imagine how a council who's obsessed by the Greenbelt hasn't assessed under Purpose 3. Because if they had assessed under Purpose 3, they would not have allocated ONGA 6. Interestingly, and I've never found out the reason why, Nathaniel Litchfield were the original company that did the assessments for ONGA. Before Arup, there was a full assessment by Nathaniel Litchfield. Nathaniel Litchfield took account of Purpose 3 and took fine account of it, to the extent that our site against Longfields was compared under Purpose 3 with the site ONGA 1 and 2. And because our site against Longfields was originally built in 1960 to be extended, and the houses orientated in the correct way, under Purpose 3 it scored better than ONGA 1 and 2, where the houses weren't orientated for a development beside them. So Purpose 3 is an important green belt assessment, been totally missed by this council, and they've ended up with the wrong allocations, particularly around ONGA, as a direct result. And ONGA 6 is an example of that, is a classic example of that if you look at the advice that the Greenbelt Local Government Planning Association Service, that I think this was mentioned yesterday as well. And
okay, thank you, Mr. Padfield. Just coming back to the question, the point that you raised, just to be very clear about what you're saying about ONGA R7. This is your site that you're promoting, and you think you feel that the density is too high in order
it's
to.
Inappropriate for the. It's inappropriate for the area.
Thank you, Mr. Edwards.
Much of what I wanted to say has been covered by Mr. Padfield, so I'll be very, very brief. I noticed in this morning's proposed amendments, which have just been read out, and a line which. A couple of lines that really did ring alarm bells with me. And it's the comment with regards to R7, the development requirements in Appendix 6 reflect the presence of TPOs on the site. In recognition of the presence of other trees on the site, the council proposes an amendment, and so on and so on. That suggests to me that when R6 and R7 in particular, were included in the submission version of the local plan rather than in the consultation version, the Regulation 18 version, this was done as a last-minute rush job and a desk job at that, because how could someone, if they had carried out a thorough assessment of the site and visited the site, not have recognised the presence of those other trees, and we're talking about a significant disparity in the number of trees, and just referred in the body, page 101, 102 of Appendix 6, to simply 2 tree preservation order protected trees. It suggests to me, and I may be wrong, but it suggests to me that this was just done as a last-minute desk job, and the whole process going on up until today has been a case of ex post facto rationalisation, trying to find the reasoning and the justification after the decision was taken.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Edwards. I'll ask, has anyone got any, I'll ask the council if they want to come back on that. Has anyone got any comments on the remaining sites, R3, R5 or R8, or the existing designated employment site, E1? Okay, let's take all of those now, and then we'll ask the council to come back on them. Miss Dadd, can you be clear about which site you're talking about? And I will ask you to keep your comments fairly brief, please, because we have other matters to get through today. Thank you.
Thank you. It's relation to R3, and I don't think it's really been considered the importance of car parking for the Ongar Health Centre, which serves the surrounding area. It has 12,000 patients, and less than 20 car parking spaces. There's a car park over in the leisure centre, but that is at 80% capacity. I've done actually counts on that. That's at 80% capacity during the day outside the surgery hours. On a Tuesday and Wednesday, it's absolute chaos up there because they also have the blood test as well, and it really must not be ignored. Thank you.
So your concern is that that site is required for additional parking? Yes. Okay, thank you. Mr. Padfield.
Yeah, I'll run through just them quickly. R3, I totally agree with Mary on this. If you look at the places and sites document that's been produced, the council say there's no current capacity constraints at Ongar Health Centre. The council expects that proposals will come forward over time through the clinical commissioning groups and GP operators as demand arises for additional GB provision. Well, as it's laid out, when the council expect the GPs to come forward, want more space, I know for a fact they want more space, but they've built houses all over the only area that they can put them there. The council's proposals for R3 are ridiculous. That land used to belong to the hospital I was born in, and it should not be built on. There is a clear requirement there for parking. Now there's going to be a growing demand for more doctor space. The other issue, and I'll run through it quickly, is the issue of the which was last on your agenda. Are you going to get through it, madam?
Well, I will get through it.
Relationship of Shelley and R1 and R2.
Yes, we'll stop there.
I can do it now or
no,
leave
thank
it?
you, no. So if you could come back on the R3, please.
Are we coming back on R3 or R7? R3.
R3. I think you can come back on R7 if you feel that there's more to be said.
In relation to R7, the only thing I was going to say was that the indicative net capacity assessment reduced by half the site in order to mitigate the impact on the neighbouring low-density properties and to enable the retention of trees and hedges.
Thank you.
And the reference to that is written up in Appendix B 1.6.4 to the Site Selection Report EB 805N. And the site reference is SR 0989-Z.
Thank you.
In relation to ONG R3, I don't think I can add much to what we set out in our hearing statement, which is that we've been advised that there are no current capacity constraints at the Ongar Health Centre, and that we don't therefore consider Ongar R3 is required to provide additional GP floor space.
Thank you. So turning to the Greenbelt, again, I don't want to, as I said at the beginning, I don't want to repeat the discussion that we've already had. I'd be interested to hear from the council about purpose 4 in relation to R1 and R2. And again, if you could talk about the relationship to Shelley, but I have taken the points that you've raised about the historic reasons for looking at the settlements being separate, and obviously it's quite clear to me without you needing to tell me that it fills a gap between them. But feel free to make any comments that you want to on those points now. But don't repeat what you've already said, I would ask, because we do need to draw this to a close. Thank you. Ms. Dadd.
Thank you. My comment really is, if we're looking at it as a historic town, you do have a viewpoint as you come through from the historic railway, and that gives the impression of you have a viewpoint of the historic town, and I think that gap is very, very important in maintaining the historic settlement That's really my point, is that on that, and it should perhaps be have a stronger clarification on purpose 4.
So in your view, the filling of the gap is significant for the setting. That's the historic purpose for the setting of the
Yes,
sound.
it is.
Okay.
And I actually disagree with my lady to the right, who said that R102 has only got a very small significance on the high street, because the buildings she's not included are actually still in Greenbelt, and they are listed buildings.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Padfield.
Thank you, Ma'am. I just refer you to the Greenbelt assessment for R4 and 1 and 2 in this regard. Ongar, this is Ongar R4. It lies partly within the gap between Chipping Ongar and the hamlet of Shelley to the northwest of the parcel. That is the Greenbelt assessment of R4. Now, the Greenbelt assessment of R1 and 2, parcel known as Bowes, they spelt it incorrectly, and partially divides the northern part of Chipping Ongar from the southern part of Chipping Ongar. Now, in all my life in Ongar, I've never heard Shelley described as the northern part of Chipping Ongar. But now we have a situation where parcels within a few metres of each other, one is correctly described as the hamlet of Shelley. The other one is totally incorrectly described as the northern part of Chipping Ongar. Now, to my mind, that is not an accidental mistake. That is a deliberate mistake to hide the fact that, in fact, parcels 1 and 2 they are trying to demonstrate that parcels 1 and 2 sit there without any harm.
Okay.
The person who wrote that Greenbelt assessment knew precisely what the council intended to allocate.
Okay.
And so it took my colleague next door, the barrister next door, who's more learned, mentioned ex post facto.
Okay.
If you ever want a
at this stage,
demonstration of
Mr.
ex post
Padfield,
facto, it's
I'm
here.
more interested. I want to hear from the other people about the effect rather than the process. I accept the point you've made. We've heard that. I've heard the concerns about how you're concerned about how things have done
But if
after
all
the fact.
all the Greenbelt reviews are written after the council have decided the allocation, the whole thing is a charade.
Okay.
All of the Arab thing has all come past the decision to allocate. And the whole purpose of the inquiry, the whole purpose of this of the assessments, all the way through, is all ex post facto. It's all a charade.
Okay.
And this is not the way we should
thank
be
you.
proceeding.
So I've taken that point. Mr. Hollingworth.
Thank you, Ma'am. Just in terms of the Greenbelt assessment in respect of the West Concept Framework Plan area, and particularly R2, as you note in your agenda, it identifies the site making a relatively strong contribution in terms of the historic setting of the settlements. But when one reads into that and why that conclusion has been reached, it's clear that it's by virtue of it being adjacent to Great Stoney School conservation area to the east. And I think it's important to note that there are two conservation areas in Ongar. We've got the Chipping Ongar Conservation Area, which is the historic core of the settlements, which dates back, I believe, from the 11th to 12th century. And R2 is very much functionally detached from that. There's a whole swathe of modern development between R2 and that historic core already. And then separately, we've got the Great Stoney School Conservation Area. But unlike the Chipping Ongar Conservation Area, that doesn't reflect the historic core of a settlement, but rather its significance is protecting former school buildings which were built as part of an orphanage between 1903 and 1905. And the council's website describes them as not being of exceptional architectural merit individually, but are particularly well-preserved examples of their type. And there's nothing in that assessment to suggest that the openness of a parcel land which is separated from this conservation area by the high street and is well screened from it, nothing suggests the openness of that land is required to protect the significance of that particular conservation area. So I feel the somewhat slightly negative assessment against purpose 4 is predicated on a rather simplistic assessment of mere proximity to conservation area without looking at what the significance of that conservation area is. But ultimately, I think it's notable, Mom, that despite identifying that, in the round, the council still felt that it was appropriate to allocate the site.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to take a last point now from Ms Partridge and then come back to the council.
Thank you, Mum. It was just in relation to my client site R1 and specifically the point on purpose 4, which says that the parcel contributes to the openness of the approach to Chipping Ongar from Epping Road to the west. I just note that there's significant and mature hedging along that, and I would argue that is a very limited contribution that it makes. And just to address Mr Padfield's comment about Shelley being a hamlet, I think we've talked about the range of shops and services that are located within Shelley. Perhaps it should have said the northern part of Ongar rather than Chipping Ongar, but I think the integral part that Shelley plays in the town is reflected by the location of those services to the north of the 414. Thank you.
Thank you. And final opportunity now for the council, please.
Thank you, Madam. Just to say that we've acknowledged that the Greenbelt Review sets out that the allocated sites do make a relatively strong contribution to Purpose 4, but we've heard from Mr Hollingworth the reasons why perhaps it's not as strong when looked in isolation, and the Purpose 4 assessment for the parcel emphasises some of the points that he made. But we have, obviously, Greenbelt was one factor in our consideration of allocation of sites, and we felt that these sites provided an opportunity for coordinated development when allocated together, which would meet sustainability objectives more successfully than those sites located on other lands, making a less contribution to the Greenbelt in Ongar. Thank you. Do you want me to say something about Shelley now as well? The council doesn't consider that the land proposed for allocation as Ongar 1-2 would close an important gap between these two parts of Ongar and cause coalescence, and we feel that's supported by evidence that suggests that Ongar 1 or 2 make no contribution to Purpose 2 of the Greenbelt, reflecting that this Greenbelt purpose is concerned with the merging of towns into one another as opposed to areas within towns. And the site is located within the settlement envelope for Ongar. Coalescence is therefore likely to only be of concern where it would result in a loss of distinctiveness of the character of the constituent parts of a settlement, where that character is informed by the openness of the Greenbelt. The council does not consider that to be the case in relation to Shelley.
Okay, I'm not going to take any more points now, I'm afraid, because I've heard everything. But what I will say, just so that you're aware, is that obviously I've heard what you've said about the gap, and I accept the Greenbelt point that the council's just made. But obviously I'm aware from what you've already said that there's a historic character issue there as well, which isn't wholly dependent on any conclusions reached about the Greenbelt and the Greenbelt purposes. So there's a Greenbelt element, but there's also a character. So I want you to be sure that I've obviously heard that. But I am going to draw this session to an end now. How quick are you, Miss Dad? Okay, last point.
Yes, their consideration of towns also has an exception for Lower Nasing. And if you also look at East Herts, they actually, because of coalescence with Lower Nasing, and the same should apply with Shelley and Chipping Ongar.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. So we'll have a break now until 11:30. The there is actually a new council representative as well, so I will ask everybody around the table to just introduce themselves briefly. And on this side of the table, if you could say who you are, who you're representing, and what your interest is in this morning's session, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Good morning, Madam. I'm Mark Beard, the barrister instructed by Epping Forest District Council. To my right is Ms. Alison Blom-Cooper, and to her right is Mr. William Marr-Heenan from Arup.
I'm Paul Beaufrere, a Shearing resident living close to all the sites to be proposed to be released from the Green Belt under the local plan.
Good morning, Ma'am. Lois Partridge from Saunders, representing the landowners for Lower Shearing site LSHR-R1.
Thank you. There's a button, the one that looks like a person speaking.
Put my glasses on. Beg your pardon, Madam.
Okay.
Jeremy Roos, resident of Hyonga.
Thank you.
Good morning, Claire Hutchinson, Saunders, representing Bridget's uncle, sites SHR-R1 and SHR-R3 as the landowner.
Thank you.
Hello, Rich Cook, Essex County Council, Planning Service.
David Sprent, Essex County Council, Transportation.
Thank you. And on this side.
Good morning, Madam. Annabel Graham-Paul of Council. I'm representing Ongar Properties Limited in relation to Land at Mill Lane, High Ongar. And to my right sits Stephen Hayhurst, who is Chartered Town Planner.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Okay, so we begin this morning with... Sorry, just to check before we move on, so I know whether to stop. Do we have anyone here for Buckhurst Hill at the moment? Oh, okay. Well, they might join us. We'll see later. Okay, thank you. So policy P12, Cooper Sale, Fifield, High Ongar, Lower Shearing, Morton Shearing, and Stapleford Abbots. So we just begin with a couple of general matters before moving on to the site-specific issues. Now, I have two questions on here concerning school places. And as I said this morning, probably repeat myself in every session now, but there was a general discussion yesterday regarding a need to add into the infrastructure requirement sections the potential need for contributions to be made towards primary school and secondary school expansion, but there will be flexibility in the policy for that to be considered depending on the timing and the nature and the need at the time of any application. So my first question is, on that basis, does anybody feel strongly about the addition of that clause? No, thank you. But I did have a specific question here on the front, on the first question I had, are Hertfordshire County Council content that there will be sufficient school places to serve Shearing and Lower Shearing? I've put that because the council statement indicates that the modelling shows there's no need for expansion to serve those places, but I think it was Hertfordshire County Council who raised the concern, so I just wonder whether that modelling had been shared with them and whether there was still a dispute, and if there is, will the addition of the modified wording sort it out, essentially?
Thank you, Madam. The recent correspondence we've had with Hertfordshire County Council has confirmed that they regularly meet with their colleagues at Essex County Council to discuss education provision. From those conversations, Essex County Council have confirmed that sufficient education provision will be made for all housing within Essex County Council, and Hertfordshire County Council are therefore satisfied that Essex will ensure the provision for planned growth within their jurisdiction. So we do consider that the amendment proposed will deal with any issues in relation to education provision.
Yeah, I just have a very brief point to add on that. My impression is that this concern arose from an early stage representation from Hertfordshire as a result of the proximity of places, in particular like Lower Shearing, to Sawbridgeworth, which geographically is extremely close. As you might imagine, there is an element of what you might describe, what you might loosely call border jumping between pupils both ways between schools. So the Essex County Council perception is that there was initially a concern from Hertfordshire that any growth proposed for places like Lower Shearing was likely to result in a greater tendency for some of that border jumping type thing. But obviously, as has been said, there are discussions on an ongoing basis between the two education authorities, and they're able to resolve these types of things. And Essex County Council has also been able to resolve plans by which expansion can be done at the relevant schools if required for the growth that we're talking about. And the indications we have is that this is not a great concern. I do have more detail if necessary, but I think in general that's probably quite okay, really.
Thank you for that, Mr. Cook. That's helpful. Again, we have a modification proposed similar to this morning concerning the potential effect of changes to the recreational zone of influence for Epping Forest SAC. Just to update anyone who wasn't here this morning, I think the council said it was their intention that actually this sort of flexible policy wording should apply to every policy. I don't remember seeing that modification proposed in relation to every policy. I might be wrong, but I certainly know I haven't raised it in every agenda. So can you just confirm, is it your intention that there should be something placed in every place policy?
Yes, indeed, and we're in the process of discussing that with Natural England to agree the wording of it. We did meet with them last week, and they were broadly happy, but we're waiting for them to actually sign that off.
Any comments on that? Thank you. Okay, did anyone want to raise any other general matters before we move on to the site-specific matters? Thank you. Okay, so the first site I want to just consider on my agenda is the Stapleford Abbott site R1 on Oakfield Road. Now I have some specific questions here which I want some answers from the council. Is anyone else here particularly interested in this site, just so that I know? No, okay. In that case, let me just get the right page. Thank you. Okay, so I have been here. So I've seen the site. Just a few points here would be helpful for me for some clarification. Forgive my pronunciation at all, but where is Havering at Bower, and what's the concern that's been expressed around coalition?
It's Havering at Bower, and it's in the London Borough of Havering. It's not actually shown, unfortunately, on the map that's in the plan, but I'm sure we could provide you one if that would be helpful.
Just give me an idea of the sort of distance concern, the nature of that place.
We're just going to check exactly what the distance is. Haven't got it set out.
Okay.
But in summary, the council doesn't consider development of STAP R1 would lead to the coalescence of Stapleford Abbots and Havering at a Bower. Do you want me to deal with the other matters in relation to the site
Yes, please.
now?
Yep.
So one of the questions you asked was the nature of access constraints and necessary mitigation. At paragraphs 319, 391, and that's on page 161 of the council's hearing statement, we explain that STAP R1 was assessed against the criteria for access to site at stage 2 and stage 6.2 of the site selection process. Council officers undertook site visits to assess the suitability of access points, and it was established that a suitable access could be achieved from Oak Hill Road to the site. And that's shown at page B605 of Appendix B 1.4.2, results of stage 2 and stage 6.2 assessment. At stage 4 and 6.4, The site was also assessed against the criterion 2.3 on-site physical and infrastructure constraints, including highways. This assessment was also informed by site promoter responses as well as other sources to inform the assessment. Based on the information provided to the council, it was assessed that whilst access constraints are present, these could be mitigated through design solutions. And the council considers that the development requirements which are set out in Appendix 6 recognise this constraint, should recognise this access constraint, and we're proposing an amendment which is on the sheet of amendments. And for those people who are new, we've circulated some further amendments to matters that have arisen as a result of the inspector's questions this morning. And on that sheet, we're referring to amendment number 3 to recognise the on-site constraints.
Are you able to just say broadly what the nature of those constraints are?
I'm not sure that I have got the details of those constraints, but bear with me. I'm sure my colleague will be able to tell me exactly what they are. But maybe it's helpful to know that it's the subject of a pre-application submission at the moment, and the proposals went to a local development management forum on the 11th of December last year. So that's the Development Management Forum is the mechanism we've set up for community engagement on sites outside the concept framework areas and master plan areas to ensure that we get early input from the community on proposals that are coming forward at the pre-application stage. And then those views were then taken to a quality review panel on the 14th of December 2018. As a result of that, amendments have been made to the proposals, and they are going back again to the quality review panel this Friday, 17th of May. And obviously one of the things that they will be looking at is the access to the site. We do have, as part of the panel, transport specialists on that panel.
Thank you.
It's less than a mile from the separation between, but it's about a mile, I've been told.
What is that settlement? Is it
between Havering Atterbow and the site,
Yep.
at Stapleford Abbots, courtesy of Google Maps, I'm told.
Thank you.
To the south along the B175.
Yeah, to the south and across the B175.
Thank you. Anything more on the nature of the access constraints before we...
I don't have anything more to say.
Having difficulty hearing? Me? You?
Sorry. The issues are relating to potential issues relating to the proximity to the side roads and visibility. But obviously those are things which are being discussed as part of the pre-application. And clearly that the amendments that are being made and going to be discussed this week mean that it is progressing, and I assume that those issues are being addressed.
Okay, thank you. And now I don't really know why I asked this question. It's obviously come up. Does a gas pipeline cross the site? You say no. Is there any evidence to the contrary?
We haven't found any. Our records don't show any gas pipelines crossing the site. We have had regard to the presence of high-pressure gas pipes in general across the district through the site selection process and the intermediate pressure gas pipelines identified by the National Grid. But the information we've collected does not indicate the presence of either high or medium pressure gas pipelines crossing the site.
Thank you. Okay, and then finally, if you could just explain, this has come up in some of the representations, if you can just give me an explanation of the site's position in the land preference hierarchy in relation to the decision to allocate it.
Sure. So the Council's Matter 15 hearing statement sets out the site's position in the land preference hierarchy in relation to the decision to allocate it, and that's set out at paragraphs 395 and 397 on page 173. But the key points are, while the site was considered potentially suitable, it was lower down in the hierarchy, primarily due to its value to the green belt, which it was allocated, if you remember the land preference hierarchy, it was allocated in category 6N. But as it explained in paragraph 2.81 of the site selection report, EB 805, other than a limited number of settlements, only those sites in categories 1 to 4 initially were taken forward for testing in the original site selection process in 2016. So because the site was originally in category 6N, it was not taken forward in terms of the draft local plan. However, when we did the further site selection work in 2017, and as we've explained in paragraph 2.97, a limited number of sites that were previously in lower categories were taken forward and reconsidered because we were keen to ensure that we had contributions to the council's 5-year land supply. So that became a consideration at that stage. So this site was then reconsidered as part of the 2017 site selection process. And in the case of STAP R1 in 2017, the site's potential contribution to early delivery of housing was considered to outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt against taking forward other sites below category 4 in the hierarchy. It was also considered to be at the edge of the existing settlements and in a good location. That justification is written up on page B777 to Appendix B 1.5.2, the results of identifying sites for further testing, and that's EB 805I.
Thank you. Thank you. If no one has any comments about that, we'll move on to Lower Shearing R1. Partridge. Let's check. Thank you. Okay, so first of all, if I just cover the points on my agenda, the council is proposing a modification to Appendix 6 regarding heritage. And this is to identify the lodges at Great Hyde Hall and to note that the Lower Shearing Conservation Area is on the Heritage at Risk Register, and this is in response to concerns raised by Historic England. Again, if the council could just confirm that that addresses Historic England's concern, and then Ms Partridge has any comments to make.
Yes, certainly that is set out in the Statement of Common Ground with Historic England, ED 24. But just to say that having reviewed third-party hearing statements, the council does propose a further amendment to correct an error and remove the reference to grade 2 listed Little Hyde Hall, which is at some distance from the site. And that's the amendment 4 on the sheet that I previously referred to that was handed round earlier today.
Can you just explain your reason for that?
The little Hyde Hall is at some distance from the site and isn't affected by it in terms of its setting, and it should have been the grade 2 listed lodges at the south entrance to the park of Great Hyde Hall.
Okay, so it's to insert one and remove the other, basically. It was
Yeah.
in an error. Okay, thank you. Ms Partridge, did you want to comment on those?
Thank you, Mum. Just to confirm, Little Hyde Hall lies approximately 1 mile to the east of the site, and there's no visibility between it and the site. So we support the council's decision to remove that reference. Just in relation to the addition of the grade 2 listed lodges at the park of Great Hyde Hall, we have commissioned a heritage assessment and submitted that in support of our hearing statement. And that notes that the development of this site should not compromise the appreciation of the lodges or their historic role. The residential and small scale of the development suggests that, as long as it is appropriately designed to avoid dominating or competing with the lodges, should be achievable without affecting present perceptions of their historic importance. And that's partly because the site was actually a former gravel pit and lies lower than the lodges, so any development on it would be lower than the existing road and lodges to the north. And so in summary, we believe that the development of this site need not constitute harm, and we accept the proposal to the policy. Thank you.
Does anyone else want to comment in relation to those matters, or indeed anything else in relation to that site? Thank you. Okay, so we'll move on now to Shearing R1. Okay, again, so I'll ask my own questions first before moving on to others. So I've asked, is Appendix 6 justified in referring to access constraints? Ms Hutchinson.
Thank you, Mum. We set out with our Regulation 19 representations an access solution for the site, so we don't consider that there is an access issue in that context. I think, however, the point that I was really making in my hearing statement links to the wider issue that we were discussing yesterday regarding the repetitive nature of Appendix 6, given DM policies, in particular T1, requiring a safe and suitable access. However, I don't propose or wish to reopen that debate and recognise that that Appendix 6 discussion has moved on since then. So on the basis that we can show a suitable access into the site, I don't now consider it's a significant issue that needs to be addressed.
So are you particularly concerned about it saying it has potential access constraints, provided that you can demonstrate they can be overcome?
We feel we can demonstrate they can be overcome at the planning application stage. The point I was making was a wider one regarding the Appendix 6 discussions that we covered yesterday.
Thank you. Okay, anything more on Shearing R1? Mr Beaufrere?
Thank you, Ma'am. Thank you for the opportunity of speaking here. I thought that this case might be considered under 4 Greenbelt alterations, but in the sense that we are now considering SHR1, I'd just like to raise a few points. My contention is that the local plan is unsound on the grounds of positive preparation and justification insofar as it relates to site allocation SHR1, the site in question. My argument really relates to parcel 005 spot 1 in the Greenbelt Assessment Stage 2, 2016, an area of land in Shearing that makes a relatively strong, quotes, contribution to safeguarding the countryside from encroachment, and the release of which is considered to cause a, quotes, high degree of harm to the Greenbelt. I now need to drill down to a segment within this parcel, 005 spot 1. The segment is block SR0033 in the consultation draft of the local plan October 2016. That in turn breaks down into the backland portion of block SR0033 and what I call the foreland portion, the half which is close to the road, the B183. I'm requesting that the remainder of block SR0033 is excluded. In the consultation version of the plan, October 16, half of the block SR0033, the backland portion, was excluded. And I'm now asking for all of this block, including SHR spot R1, to be excluded. Both parts of SR0033 have similar characteristics. Both are inside the green belt, both are outside the village envelope, both are close to Daubney's farm buildings, and both are used for horse grazing, though both were used for cereal farming when I came to the village. Treating the two parts of SR 0033, I contend, is unsound in principle. I'd also state that removing SHR R1 from the plan would help preserve the rural character of Shearing Village. Leaving it in, on the other hand, would move a significant step closer to ribbon development on the street Shearing, the B183. Retaining green lungs on the street retains the diversity of residential, commercial, fields, hedges and ponds that characterises a village in and surrounded by the green belt. I'd also just like to point out that since my submission in January 2018, the subject of air quality in Shearing has raised its head through the delay of a planning decision for residential development EPF/3411/18 on a Shearing site very similar to SHR R1. Whilst not wishing to prejudge the council's decision, I believe that this is another reason why SHR R1 should be excluded from the local plan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ms Hutchinson.
Just in terms of the Greenbelt issues raised, I set out in my hearing statement a comprehensive overview of the treatment of the site in regard to the Greenbelt assessment. The site is part of a much larger parcel which stretches across the entire northern part of Shearing. The parcel itself is only 0.48 of a hectare versus the wider parcel of 44.6 hectares. So on the basis of the grain of assessment, the two very different animals. In terms of the parcel itself, it's contained to either side by residential development, to the north by Daubney's farm, which has consent for residential use of the buildings alongside the existing farmhouse. So it is relatively well contained. Moreover, the Greenbelt assessment notes that in dismissing or in suggesting that Purpose 3 might not form part of the further assessment, which is the approach that the council then took forward, that it would be sensible to have regard to the landscape evidence base in doing so. The landscape evidence base for the site is part of the Settlement Edge Landscape Sensitivity Study, which is EB712 at figure 7.4, and this is reproduced in my hearing statement. It clearly shows that the assessors, authors of that study, considered the site to be part of the settlement rather than part of the landscape setting, in that it was actually on the inside, on the settlement side of the parcel that it was closest to. So it was very much considered to be part of the built-up area of Shearing. In relation to just picking up on the air quality point, I think all applications currently within Epping Forest are being held of a certain size. I'm sure Ms Blom-Cooper can explain, are being held at the moment in regard to further agreement with Natural England, so that's not something that's specific for Shearing. I think in the context of the ribbon development point, it's very much a sensible infill site within the built-up area of the village. Thank you.
Whilst so that we don't come back to it later, as the green belt has been raised, would you like to address? I had a question later on about the relatively strong contribution to Purpose 4 that the count. Oh no, that's Lower Shearing. I think we're in the wrong place now. I'll come back to that in relation to Lower Shearing. Sorry, I was just looking further ahead.
Yes,
on my
sorry,
agenda
that's
than
my
I needed
colleague
to be.
rather than myself.
Yeah, okay, we'll come back to that. Okay, thank you. Did the council want to make any response to the points raised by Mr. Beaufort?
Thank you, Madam. Just by way of clarification, the site proposed in the draft local plan was a larger site to the site which is now proposed for allocation, and that was to address some of the concerns that have been raised. And so only a limited the southern part of the site is proposed for allocation now, just to clarify that point. As noted at paragraph 414 and page 168 of the Council's hearing statement, the alteration to the Greenbelt proposes to remove land for allocation from the Greenbelt. The site formed part of a much larger parcel, which, when taken in its entirety, did make a relatively strong contribution to Purpose 4. But the site itself is considered to promote settlement rounding and enable a small-scale site to come forward in a rural community to ensure local needs are met.
Thank you. Thank you. Did you want to make a final point before we... Did you want to make another point?
May I just make an observation on the, one of the points raised there, that in the settlement edge landscape sensitivity study in 2009, this block, SR0033, including SHR-R1, was not actually considered. However, 4 of the 5 landscape setting areas in Shearing were adjudged areas of high sensitivity, plus the last one moderately sensitive, and it's therefore debatable whether SR0033 will have been adjudged close enough to be considered part of the settlement rather than the countryside, or indeed what level of sensitivity it would have been accorded.
Thank you. Okay, final response from...
Just quickly, just to clarify that this SHR-R1 was not considered as part of the parcel, it was considered as part of the settlement itself, so it didn't form part of the landscape setting parcel that was considered in that study, because the authors of that study felt that it was part of the settlement, notwithstanding that it was in the Greenbelt. Hopefully that makes sense.
Okay,
there's a diagram in my hearing statement.
Thank you. Thank you. We'll move on to Shearing R2 and R3. And first of all, just correct an error I've made. I've said they're not listed in Part B of the policy, but they are listed in Part B of the policy, just not in the way that all the others are. But that's fine. That's nothing needs.
We've tried to group within the smaller settlements the allocations together. But if you think it would be clearer signposting,
I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters as long as they're there. I thought they were missing, but they're not missing. Okay. Now, I don't have any specific questions in relation to R2. Does anyone want to raise anything about R2? Okay, and then in relation to Shearing R3, the question here was it justified for Appendix 6 to imply that development could impact upon the setting of chambers, farmhouse and pump? And this is dealt with in the council now thinks it isn't, I think, because of the distance involved, and that it's proposed to remove the heritage section from Appendix 3. Ms. Hutchinson?
Yes, we've seen that modification, and that answers our point. Thank you.
Anything else on R3? Thank you. So if we move on then to High Ongar R1, just wait while I find the right page. Thank you. Perhaps if I could ask Mr. Roos to was it you that raised concerns in relation to this site? Would you like to explain your concerns?
Thank you, Madam. Thank you for inviting me. I've responded in writing to the Regulations 18 and 19 procedures and the questions that you've asked regarding a field in High Ongar that as early as 2016 was proposed by the developer as a potential housing development. This site clearly sits outside the rural village of High Ongar and in the Greenbelt. Planning has been turned down on Greenbelt grounds in the past, so the only reasonable opening was to change the Greenbelt status in this Epping plan procedure and have the land removed from the Greenbelt. figure 5.24 of SR 0181 site allocations, I believe this is one of the first of 18 to be put forward to the council. At the time, anyone at the council reviewing this particular site with the proposed boundary greenbelt change, which includes my garden, would quickly see that it would directly affect just two properties, my neighbour who lives at Mill Cottage and myself at Windmill Cottage. As landowners of part of the proposed site, we were never consulted about the change to the green belt. My feeling is sure that we should have been had some general consultee status. Had we been consulted at an early stage?
Sorry, Mr. Roos, just to pause there. Are you saying that? Are you saying it affects your garden, or that you are actually a landowner of R1?
As it was proposed before this alteration today, my garden is included in R1.
Right. So you own
Yes.
all the land or part of the land?
No, some of the land that goes down the side of it. I think the alteration, I stand to be corrected, the change today sort of tries to get around that.
Madam, maybe I can help here. We have got a planning application submitted for the site which contains a slightly amended site boundary. So on the basis of that, the council is now proposing to amend the site boundary for the allocation so it aligns with the boundary used for the planning application. And I have got drawings here which I can share with you which shows the difference between the allocation and the site boundary for the planning application.
That would be useful. And if you can you pass on to Mr. Roos? Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you for that, madam. If I can just take that quickly out of context so that we can clear this issue up. There have been two planning applications leading up recently to one in November and one in March of this year. Unfortunately, the planning officer who presented the plans presented the whole area, not the reduced area as has just been put in front of me. And the agent, Stephen Hayhurst's section 19 includes the larger area and not the redefined area. Now, I do know that Mr. Hayhurst, who I understand is here, corrected or made this corrected a more accurate plan, but unfortunately dated it the same date as the original one. So every time it gets repeated or represented, the wider plan comes up.
Okay.
So my response is obviously at an early stage that I was responding to a larger section of land.
Okay.
Which is my garden.
Okay. So sorry, this is slightly irregular, but I'm going to come over here for a moment. Can you
Yes,
here, you can
yes.
can you mark on there where your garden is?
Yes, it's everything from here.
Okay.
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 Can I have that one?
Yes, of course you can. Thank you.
Okay, so the garden includes the sort of strip down here.
So what I'm saying, madam, if I can carry on, at an early consultation stage, I should have been regarded as a landowner and had some general consultee status. Had we been given been consulted at an early stage, I for one would have had a positive and a helpful evidence-backed input, which could have saved many hours of deliberation by the council officials. EB 1152.1 states that the council has consulted extensively at an early stage. For the reasons I've just given you, I beg to differ. The council did not consult me at all. It just left us to find out by pure chance. This is not proper and goes to evidence the lack of soundness to this plan, in my opinion. Moving on, in relation to SR 0181, which then moved to be developed to Hyonga R1, the LUC Stage 2 Greenbelt Assessment reported to Epping Forest District Council its evaluation of this field. Plot 023.4, page 28, summary of harm as very high to the green belt. Interestingly and important to mention, the adjacent plot 023.5 as very low harm to the green belt. This becomes very important when Arup gets involved, who start using a language of scrubland, who in their site suitability assessment, EB 801G VI or 5, score the land, and I quote, site within the greenbelt, but the level of harm caused by release of the land for development would be none. Now, clearly, Arup were wrong by not following up the LUC assessment. This then started a catalogue of errors by Arup in its site assessments, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but just as an example, it initially had this exaggerated area available to build on, which we've just covered. Item 13B, Arup saying there are no ancient trees on the site. There is a large ancient stroke veteran tree right in the middle of the field. 4.1, brownfield and greenfield land. Arup says the majority of the land is greenland, beg your pardon. It's incorrect. Any check on Google Earth will see that it's all greenfield. Just a couple more. Arup says it's unlikely to lose the loss to open space. This is not correct. The only permitted access will be across land and lose one of the only 3 open spaces for residents in Millfield, as is shown on this map here, madam. And that is part of one of the open spaces for Hyonga. Says impact on TPOs not an issue, as the trees are not subject to tree protection. Well, obviously we know this is wrong because there's 2 trees with got preservation orders on them. And the last issue on there, 6.4, access to site. Arup says suitability access already exists. This is again wrong, as the site was completely enclosed with no access at all. Arup also states in the reports that this field represents just infill, and on one occasion it refers to it as a brownfield site, which is incorrect. To me, it's absolutely clear that this is a DESCOT assessment with a catalogue of errors made by Arup, which ruled the day with no method of correcting them. This is where I question the soundness of the plan, and it falls down in my respectful submission. I wrote a 19-page response in my Regulation 18 to the Council, providing evidence correcting these factual inaccuracies, as did many other people. I was never consulted. A rescore of the site would have ruled it out, but there was no methodology to pick up on these gross mistakes, and dismissing the site from the plan at an early stage. And so Arup, and more importantly the Council, continued to compound the issue by repeating these mistakes. A sound, robust reviewing system with the power to dismiss sites should have been in place, but the one-way street attitude prevailing, ignoring all the factual inaccuracies on the site, was proposed for allocation as per Appendix B16.6 brackets EB 805P.
Mr. Roos, can I just stop you there for a minute? Can I just ask you?
Yes.
So you're obviously you've expressed lots of concerns about the allocation
Yes.
of this site. Do your concerns about its allocation in the plan remain if the boundary is amended? Are you concerned? Are you concerned for sort of all the general reasons that you've said, or were you particularly concerned about the inclusion of some of your land? I mean, what I'm asking, I suppose, in broad terms, is are you? You've obviously highlighted the errors that were made. Do you still remain concerned about the allocation of the site, even with your land removed? So I'm trying to see where you're where you want to get to with this matter.
Yes, I was coming to an end. I was coming to an end. I had 3 more lines to read, so
Sorry.
I don't know if I could finish those, and then it
Okay.
might make it clear.
Yep.
Is that okay?
That's fine.
I am aware that you're pushed for time. One other comment I wish to make, this is a field digging around building roads under the canopy of this veteran tree, as proposed in his latest plans by the developer, will destroy it. Latest publication of the NPPF 2019, paragraph 175 is clear. When development resulting in loss or deterioration of irreplaceable habitats, i.e. ancient or veteran trees, planning should be refused. Alternative sites in Hyonga were suggested, and both these items are land owned by the Epping Council and controlled by them, one of which is a brownfield site. This and other alternative sites were ignored. In conclusion, the site restraints will not sustain any development with the house density suggested, which is 3 times the density of the local housing. In answer to your question now, Madam, I will draw your attention to matter 5 responses, and in particular the last paragraph of my conclusion. Should the site be continued in the plan, i.e. not taken out at all, I would respectfully submit regarding restoration of the original suggested change in the Greenbelt boundary as submitted on SR 0181, which in clarity means a more defensible boundary around the back of the 2 houses rather than the fiddly bit that you see in front of you. You look confused, Madam. Can I help?
Yeah, I think if you just don't worry too much about the studies and things at the moment. I just want to sort of a simple answer, really. Are you objecting?
I'm objecting to any development under Greenbelt rules.
You're objecting to any development on this site?
Yes.
And
should you fall against me
Yes.
on that, then I would ask you to revert back to the original that Arab showed, where the Greenbelt boundary is a defensible boundary around the back of the 2 houses.
As it is shown in the plan?
As it was shown originally in the
I'm not
proposed
going to
plan.
remember what that is now. I'm asking you about the boundary in the plan. Is the boundary? No, to be honest, that doesn't matter to me too much. What I want to know is whether the boundary in the plan.
Yeah.
So if you can have a look at page 196 of the plan. Because that is the allocation that's being proposed now, whatever the study said.
Okay. That's what I'm suggesting, that it should be restored to. Pass that back. To whom do you want? Madam, please. Thank you.
That's okay. But can you comment on the plan boundary?
Because of complications of boundaries, I don't think that's a defensible boundary, and so the document I just provided in front of you is a far more defensible boundary.
But I want just an answer to the boundary that's in the plan is the allocation that's being proposed.
Right. Yeah.
So that the difference essentially from here is that that touches the boundaries of the gardens.
Yes,
Do you think
I was
a boundary?
referring to the Greenbelt boundary. I do apologise. Sorry, we're talking at cross purposes.
Okay. Still, the council is now proposing to amend the boundary of the allocation as shown with this red line plan, which is different.
Yes.
So which one do you, if I were to remain with the allocation, which one do you think it should be in terms of this boundary here of the allocation?
Well, obviously, the amended one, I accept that the amended one is far more accurate than the first one. Sorry if I'm not making myself clear.
That's okay.
But my last point was that if you're against taking this plot out of the plan altogether, then the Greenbelt boundary should be changed back to the document I just showed you.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam.
Thank you, Mr. Roos. Thank you. That's helpful. Can I just ask the council about this proposed amendment? So, if the line were redrawn here, would that affect the Greenbelt boundary?
Yes, it would.
So
I think we'd redraw the Greenbelt boundary to align with the site.
So you'd cut out a very small strip.
Sorry, I haven't got a copy of that. So, okay. My colleague's just saying probably it would stay the same, obviously, as proposed.
Madam, can I help here, because I've got a copy of it, so if it's any help to.
So it's okay. I think maybe we need to, again, there's something that needs to be...
Okay, that's EV 1608.
Thank you. I'm concerned about, I want to know what the council's proposed amendment is at the moment. So if you're redrawing the boundary of the allocation, would you end up with a funny little strip of Greenbelt land here? No. You're shaking your head, Mr. Marheenan.
Yeah, I think for that reason we would keep the Greenbelt boundary as currently proposed in the draft in the local plan submission version.
So, but just the boundary of the residential allocation?
Yes.
Can I quickly come back on that then, Madam? Is that okay?
Yep.
That is to say that that's not a particularly defendable boundary, and for that reason I would suggest that is changed to the map I put in front of you a minute ago.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We'll leave that there for now, unless there's anyone else who wanted to speak on R1, Ongo R1. Yes.
Yes, Madam. Just on behalf of Ongo Properties, who have submitted the pending planning application for housing on this site, which has been recommended for approval by officers and is awaiting the outcome of this local plan examination. Just in relation to the boundaries, just to be absolutely clear, we obviously have no intention of developing Mr. Roos's garden. So insofar as the boundary for the allocation goes, it's perfectly proper that the amendment has been made to reflect the red line of the planning application. Thank you. Mr. Hayhurst's hearing statement has rebutted the other points that Mr. Roos has made regarding the site selection process. Conscious of the time, if there are any specific matters, I can address you on them, but otherwise they are dealt with in the hearing statement.
Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask now if there's any comments on Cooper Sale R1 or Fifield R1? Thank you. And there, under item 3 on the agenda, any comments on the existing sites that have been proposed to be designated for employment use? You can see them listed there. Thank you. Now, we have talked about the Greenbelt alterations to some extent already. Let me just have a quick look. Okay, so we talked about the Stapleford Abbott sites. Is the relatively strong contribution to purpose R1, is that in the sense of moving towards Havering, Atterbower? Or can you explain what that relatively strong contribution is?
The contribution was to purpose 1, which is not the historic purpose. It is the coalescence, but I think we've already explained that the distance is about a mile.
Okay.
Yeah, on the basis that we don't think there will be coalescence, and anyway, they're not towns as defined as in the definition for purpose 1.
And again, if we can just go back to Lower Shearing, R1, and the relatively strong contribution made to purpose R4. Ms. Partridge, would you comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Mum. In answer to the question, we question the assertion that the site makes a relatively strong contribution. It does lie within the setting of the Lower Shearing Conservation Area, but the heritage impact assessment that we have done sets out a number of reasons why development on this site is not considered to make a strong contribution to the setting of the historic town. These include the fact that the site is separated from the conservation area by the Lower Shearing Road, the fact that the conservation area is designated for its historic relationships to the west of the site with the railway, the River Stort and the Maltings, and the development of this site lies to the east, so would not affect the reasons for which the conservation area was designated. Further, the character of the conservation area has been converted. The Maltings are now residential properties, so that's another reason. And we believe that development of the site would not affect the perception of the Maltings or the outward views from the Maltings, and therefore the heritage values for which the conservation area is designated will remain legible and appreciable. Finally, in response to your question, we note that the site forms a very small part of a much larger site. The entire parcel of land that was assessed for the Greenbelt covers an area of 43.19 hectares, of which LSHR R1 covers an area of 0.63 hectares, so 1.5% of the area of the whole site. And the location of this site is within the northwestern corner of that large land parcel, adjacent to existing built form residential development and the Lower Shearing Road. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you want to add anything to that?
No, I don't think. I think it's
Thank
been
you.
adequately covered. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. That concludes my questions. Any last points from anyone in relation to policy P12? Mr. Beaufrère.
Could I just make one small point?
Certainly.
It's obvious that if one's contesting one site for removal from the green belt or development or inclusion in the local plan, one should have an answer, well, where else do I go? In other words, alternatives. So far as shearing is concerned, given that there is a 1,200 home development called Gilden Park, less than 2 miles away to the west, given that there are massive housing developments planned for Harlow North, Bishop Stortford North and South and Dunmow West, I find it perplexing that the local plan is proposing to disturb a pretty village right on the northernmost corner of the area. These, what I call greenbelt removal sites, are small scale for the district and for the area, so far as shearing is concerned, but disproportionately relevant for a small village.
Thank you. Opportunity to comment on that?
I have no comments to make.
Thank you. Thank you very much. So we'll draw that session to a close. If we just have a sort of brief 5-minute break so that anyone can leave, and we'll just set up for the discussion of Buckhurst Hill. Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Okay. Thank you. So we'll move on to talk about policy P5, Buckhurst Hill. I won't ask the council to introduce themselves again. I think everybody sitting here was here this morning when they did so, but I will ask everybody here if you could say who you are and what your interest is, please.
Thank you very much. I'm Ned Helm, a barrister at 39 Essex Chambers. I'm instructed by Buckhurst Hill Parish Council. To my right is Councillor Sylvia Watson, and to my left is Councillor Ken Williamson. They're not on your list, I think, but we had hoped that they might be able to speak on certain issues.
Okay.
I think it would be helpful for you to hear from them rather than always hearing from me, if you're
That's okay
amenable.
with me. Yep. And yourself?
I'm District Councillor Stephen Neville, representing the Buckhurst Hill East Ward.
You're a district councillor?
You'll see the representations are very much aligned with ours,
Okay.
but he's not formally part of this camp for today's hearing.
Thank you very much. We have the gentleman, Mr. Cook, Mr. Sprunt from Essex County Council. Thank you very much. Okay. Now, again, the first general matter that I wanted to consider was the one of school places. I think everybody heard the discussion we had this morning. Does anyone have anything they want to say in relation to school places? Thank you. Now, obviously, there's the 3 sites then to consider in Buckhurst Hill. You obviously, your team of people that you have, is there anything else more general that you wanted to raise before we move on to the site-specific issues, or will they come up in relation to the site-specific matters? They'll come up, will they? Okay.
I think they'll come up. We've set out a brief introduction of our position at paragraphs 1 and 2 of our hearing statement. Essentially, the position is that these allocations aren't needed because of the windfall position, but they're also each unsound and therefore should be removed from the plan in any event.
Okay, so let's discuss them then. So Buckhurst Hill R1, which is 1 Powell Road. So again, I don't know if you'd like to start. I'm happy for you to start on this side of the table to explain what your concerns are. But if you could do so first of all in the context of the questions I've asked. So I want to understand the significance of the locally listed building, and whether the developments proposed of 31 houses in its grounds is compatible with the significance, and will this erode the link between the house and the local nature reserve, which was once connected with it. Now, I have walked around here. Something I'd ask you to bear in mind, perhaps, when you answer these questions is the large fence that goes all the way around the site and the significant vegetation on the boundary, if you like, between it and the open land to the back. I've walked all the way around it, and I couldn't, apart from through the driveway entrance, you can't really see very much of it. So just to be clear about what I've seen, if you can perhaps think about that. Did you want to express your concerns? I think it'd be helpful if you did so, and then the council can respond.
Yes, please. Thank you very much. So St Just is an important locally listed building, and I'm glad you've seen it and seen its context. It is, we've explained in reasonably brief terms the building and its setting at paragraph 3 of our hearing statement. It sits above its residential garden and is a substantial and imposing building. The council recognises at paragraph 179 of their hearing statement that it does act as a constraint on the development of the site. What's between us is how much of a constraint. And we say it is a much more significant constraint than the council has accepted. The house is linked with its garden, which is linked with its wider setting. And it's important to understand the association with Charles Linder, who was connected with Beatrix Potter, who owned the Linder's Field and allowed locals to use his land for fetes and events such as that. But then conveyed the Linder's Field to the council's predecessors in the 1950s. And so when considering the building and its setting, one is considering a wider setting. And we say that there are two issues, if anything more than a mere handful of houses is put on this site. Firstly, it would challenge the dominance that the building currently enjoys. That's an important part of its setting, given the building itself, but also given its location at the top of the site. But secondly, it would sever the historic connection between St Just and Linder's Field, which is part of its broader setting. Now, we understand the context of the site with vegetation and fence, but nonetheless, in understanding the setting as you move around the area, we say it would sever that historic connection. And that, we say, is inconsistent with policy DM7 and the local plan objective A4. Is there anything else you want to add?
Thank you. Mr. Neville, Councillor Neville.
I will be brief. I will just add, yes, the Linder family, I will emphasise it was Leslie Linder, Charles Linder's son, who is connected with Beatrix Potter. Charles Linder was a wealthy philanthropist, very heavily involved in the early success of the commuter town that is Buckhurst Hill. In terms of the building, yes, I take into account there is a fence there, but of course a new building there will sever the link permanently between St Just and the Linder's Field Nature Reserve, which of course was once part of the garden of the Linder family.
Thank you. Can I ask the council to respond? And again, if you can sort of perhaps be as specific as possible about how you've taken the significance of this building into account.
Yes, thank you, Madam. The significance of the locally listed building is set out in the Council's Matter 15 hearing statement, paragraphs 178 to 181 on page 77. When undertaking the capacity assessment for the site, it included consideration of the on-site constraints which may reduce or affect the capacity of the site, and that included heritage considerations. The presence of the locally listed building was cited as one of the reasons for reducing the capacity of the site, which is set out in detail on page B836 of Appendix B 1.6.4, the results of capacity and deliverability assessments. Appendix 6 to the local plan submission version includes at page 112 a site-specific requirement in relation to heritage and requires development proposals to preserve the special architectural or historic interest of the locally listed building through its retention-sensitive conversion. Council considers that this site-specific requirement, together with provisions in policy DM7 and DM8, as proposed to be amended in accordance with the Statement of Common Ground, which we've agreed with Historic England, that's ED 24, are sufficient to ensure the preservation and enhancement of this locally listed building. In relation to the link with the adjacent Lindersfield Local Nature Reserve, there is a public right-of-way linking Powell Road to the nature reserve, which lies to the north of the allocation site and the property immediately adjacent to it. And there will be no impact on access and linkage by way of that public right-of-way. The Council is aware that there is also secondary access to the south of the allocation, which is not actually a public right-of-way. And whilst the planning system can't control access over land, the Council will obviously take that into account in terms of access to the local nature reserve when considering the design and layout of any proposals put forward for the site.
Thank you.
The Council does acknowledge the proximity of the local nature reserve, and that is also addressed within the Appendix 6 on page 112.
Thank you.
Yes, just very briefly, if I may. On the setting point, it's not an issue relating to the access to the nature reserve. It's to do with setting in heritage terms and breaking the historic link in terms of appreciation of the link between the house and the wider area through additional development. And then secondly, very briefly, in relation to Appendix 6, there are obviously welcome words in relation to sustaining and enhancing its significance, but we say that's flatly incompatible with 31 dwellings on this site.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Just before we leave that side, there's a modification proposed in relation to the green belt. Is that right, in Appendix 6?
Yes, that's right, just to ensure that the existing features of the northern boundary are strengthened as part of that. So we're intending to make an amendment to Appendix 6 to include that in relation to the greenbelt boundary aspect.
Thank you. Okay, if we move on for now to R2. Sorry.
Just before we do so, sorry,
Yes.
there were additional issues on R1,
Okay.
which we were wanting to address
Okay,
briefly,
yep,
if we
carry
may.
on, yep.
So there's an issue in relation to the green belt, not only in terms of that northern boundary. In relation to the northern boundary point, we're broadly content with the additional text, which the Council is proposing at paragraph 189 of their statement. The importance is retaining a defensible boundary, and they talk about strengthening the existing features, so that's fine. But there's a broader point about allocation of this site in terms of impact on purposes of the green belt, which we address in paragraphs 5 to 7 of our hearing statement. So as we've there set out, there is a contribution made by this site to separating Buckhurst Hill and Lawton, and therefore we say it contributes to preventing their perceived, not their actual, but their perceived coalescence, and development would therefore be contrary with the overarching aims of Greenbelt policy and also the first two purposes. It's also, we say, a countryside site, and the development would be harmful to the third Greenbelt purpose. Now, the Council's approach has been, as we understand it, to ignore the third Greenbelt purpose in their consideration of sites. But the difficulty with doing that is that countryside varies in importance, and we say this is a particularly important site given the ecological context, and it's sitting beside the nature reserve and a small village green. So as we've set out in paragraph 6 of our hearing statement, we have concerns about the impacts on countryside, but also in ecological terms of allocation of this site. So harm then additionally to the third Greenbelt purpose. The other issue that we've wanted to address in relation to this is an issue that I touched on at the very outset, but you asked a specific question in relation to this allocation, in relation to whether the capacity of windfall sites has been accurately estimated. Is this a convenient moment to just...
Yep.
Thanks very much. And it might be helpful if I hand over to Councillor Williamson for this, because he's done an analysis which we annexed to our hearing statement. And can I just hand over to you to explain that and the consequences of it?
Thank you, Madam. We have extensively checked through our records of planning applications and those permissions have been granted, and find a considerable number of windfall properties just within the parish of Buckhurst Hill. As one of the most densely populated areas in the district, there are no large parcels of land apart from the 3 that have been put forward. But there are more and more developments where people are demolishing 1 or 2 houses and putting up 13 flats, or as many as they can possibly get numbers for. So we contest that we will get our 90 properties, or already are 90% of the way through getting our 90 properties in windfall sites, and see there is no additional infrastructure for windfall sites. There's no infrastructure additionally coming to Buckhurst Hill anyway. But we feel that the allocation of all of these 3 sites has already been met by our windfall sites, and the number of 35 in the local plan is ludicrously low. Thank you.
And just to tie off one additional issue, for that reason alone, the exceptional circumstances for a Greenbelt release for this site aren't met.
Thank you. Okay, I know the council has responded before, but I'll give them the opportunity to respond on the general windfall point again, and then to come back on anything in the Greenbelt specific that's been raised over this side of the table, and then we'll move on to look at Buckhurst Hill R2.
I don't think we've got anything further to add to what we said about windfall previously.
Did you want to comment on any of the points raised about the effect of this as a countryside site, or in relation to the purposes of the Greenbelt that were raised?
Yes, indeed. The only part of the site is currently in the Greenbelt. The other part was assessed at stage 2 of the site selection process and was felt to have no significant impact in terms of harm to the Greenbelt.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to R2, which has been discussed to some extent under matter 5. But again, I don't know if the council wants to begin by sort of summarising the position for everybody present. Perhaps if we hear from the council, and then again, if you express your concerns.
In relation to Buck R2, the findings of the settlement capacity study, EB 803, supported by the viability studies, EB 300 and EB 301, provided the evidence against which an approximate net capacity of 41 units was assessed as financially viable. This included the reprovision of existing car parking. As set out in the Council's Matter 15 statement, the Council considers that the existing number of parking spaces for the London Underground customers can be retained and that's in line with the position that we've taken for other owned car parks, London Underground car parks across the district. Consistent with the principles established in the settlement capacity study, the capacity assessment in Appendix B 1.6.4, and that's EB 805N at page 837, sets out how the London Underground parking could be re-provided through basement parking. The local plan and page 114 of Appendix 6 makes it clear that these sites should have low levels of resident car parking provision, and by that we mean a very limited amount for blue badge holders and visitors, given their proximity to public transport. And that approach is consistent with paragraphs 30, 39 and 1112 of the MPPF 2012. Thank you.
Thank you. So if I might come in, so we addressed this issue at paragraph 16 and following of our statement. The existing car park is well used and covers basically the whole site. It's attractive to commuters because it's within zone 5, and if you go one stop further, you're within zone 6, so that forms an attractor. It's an important local resource, and that's recognised in Appendix 6, which also considers additional parking required for development of the site. Now, it may be the council is envisaging that there will be a lower level of car parking than you would have on a site away from the underground, but nonetheless, there will be additional car parking on site, and that presents a considerable challenge to a site which is basically fully car park at the moment, because you'll need to either build car parking up or down. And we have very considerable concerns that that's simply not a deliverable proposition, but also that it would have damaging consequences to neighbouring businesses and properties. The site deliverability assessment, which was just mentioned, gives the 41 unit capacity, which is at a 97 dwelling per hectare level adjusted, so the gross to net adjustment gives 97, which is a high number of dwellings per hectare. It's a small, thin site right by the underground line. It's constrained in a variety of regards, including in relation to dealing with noise issues, for example, for properties that are going to be placed on the site. But also the parking is going to have to be part of the additional development that's put on the site. It's not clear how that can be done, and if it can be done, it's not clear how it can be done viably with these sorts of numbers. While I'm on this site deliverability assessment, there's just one small point which I thought I'd draw attention to, which is at paragraph 3.4. It has a positive for cumulative impact on the green infrastructure, but that appears to be relating to the links with Linda's Field for R1. It's not clear how that's relevant for R2 or R3, but it seems to have factored in positively into the council's considerations. The council has also noted the statement put in by TfL Commercial. They refer to in paragraph 193 of their statement, so the TfL Commercial in relation to matter 5. That statement is made, as it says at the beginning, in its capacity as a local landowner. And so this isn't TfL's position as transport operator. But also, if I can hand over to Councillor Watson to just add a little bit more detail about information she's received from Transport for London.
Yes, thank you, Ma'am. I really just want to emphasise some of the points, because the entrance here would be at the bottom of Queen's Road, and therefore currently it's directly opposite some quite important businesses, including the only local dentist in Buckhurst Hill West. And that's without getting onto the issue of other viable businesses in the immediate vicinity and indeed the impact on residents. As regards the actual car parking provision, though, there's obviously limited information about what will be proposed at this site, but when you look at what Transport for London have said about the sites in Loughton, there they've been quite clear that they're looking at more multi-storey car parking to be able to satisfy the car parking requirements. And given this is a very constrained site, I imagine it would be the same at this site. And whilst I understand the idea that we might restrict the number of car parking spaces for the new residents of that development, not provide them does not mean to say that people will not have the cars, and it also assumes that those people would be relying very much on the tube line, and that is not necessarily the case at all. There's only one bus stop nearby, and that's a very limited bus service, which is under threat anyway. So I struggle to see how they would satisfy that, particularly when you'd have to then have an entrance which would satisfy, presumably, pedestrian access to the development and ongoing public access to public car parking. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any further concerns you want to raise in relation to R2 before I ask the council to come back on all of those?
So there are viability issues which we've addressed in our hearing statement. And it's just really you have those, but I just wanted to respond briefly to the District Council's position. So they deal with that in, I think, paragraphs 194 and following of their statement. And the reference made there is to what they say is an appropriate and proportionate approach to viability testing. But what that is code for is no specific viability testing of this site. So they're relying on a generic position in relation to this site. And we say that you have to look at this site, which is an unusual shape. It is all parking. You can only build up or down if you're going to include an increased level of parking, which is what is envisaged. And so there are specific concerns in relation to viability, and a generic approach is not going to fully understand those. That's an issue in relation to viability generally, and then it feeds on to a concern that if you do have development on this site, it won't be able to make affordable housing provision in line with policy H2. And again, in paragraph 199 of the District Council's hearing statement, that issue of affordable housing is dealt with generically in relation to what is required by H2. But the concern here is, well, if it's not viable to have it on this site, if this site comes forward at all, is it going to have affordable housing?
Thank you. I would just like to say that the proposal of the site, which came very late in the day, has caused considerable distress to residents who would be impacted by the development. And the particular concern, I think, might be the height of any development and its density. And as I understand it, there is no definition of what would be a tall or high-rise building. And what we see, again, looking back to the Loughton example, where Transport for London have said that, in fact, to make the sites viable would require, I think in one instance, a 12-storey building. So clearly, when you come to these specific sites, the generality is not very helpful here. And I would like to see, if this was to be left in the plan, I would personally like to see a stated limit on the number of stories. I think that would be helpful to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Feel free again, obviously, to address any of the points that you raised, but in light of sort of what we've heard specifically there at the end, can the council give a view as to whether it considers high-rise development would be appropriate in this location, and if it doesn't, whether there are sufficient safeguards in the plan?
I think the council would argue that there are sufficient safeguards in the plan through the other policies, and particularly DM9. When we did the capacity assessment, we took into account the context of the surrounding area in terms of determining the number of homes that could be accommodated on each site. So although the density has been upped in this location because of its proximity to public transport, it has also taken account of the local context and character in making that assessment.
So what is envisaged in terms of what?
I think we envisage flatted development, but not high rise, and by that probably no more than 4 or 5 stories.
Just in this context, 4 or 5 stories is quite high, particularly 5 stories. Is there anything 5 stories around here? No.
What's your response to that?
As I said, I don't think I've got more to add to the fact that the capacity assessment took account of the surrounding area and what might work and might be appropriate, and the work that was done on the settlement capacity study for Buck R3 and the visualisation that was done on that and what could be achieved, obviously was taken across to here to inform what the density could be on that site.
Sorry, so is there a picture, a visualisation? So is there a picture of what's envisaged for this site?
There isn't a picture of what's envisaged on this site yet. We took the principles and work that was established through that across to help us inform the capacity for this site. And equally, the viability work that was done for other similar sites and car parks across the district was taken across to inform whether or not the site was viable, as well as the district-wide viability work that we did.
So that gives rise to a certain amount of concern, because that's not transparent unless we've missed it in terms of the documentation before you. We have on the site deliverability assessment, we have an acceptance at paragraph 2.2 that no information is held on the site's viability. It says, based on the site's postcode area, the Shamar viability assessment has not identified any viability issues. That's as far as it goes. In relation to the settlement capacity study, which is EB 803, that's very high level, doesn't get into the nitty-gritty, but only deals with R3 in any event. It doesn't deal with R2, but it really doesn't tell you much about the viability position in relation to R3. And then you have a visualization of R3 in EB 803H. That's an extremely general document. There's very little analysis which informs the view on capacity. But you do have a visualization for R3, which essentially takes the area which is currently the businesses is said to be parking here, and the area which is currently parking is said to be a building, but you get a large blockish building on site. Now, that gives rise to all sorts of concerns in relation to R3 and whether that's a suitable way of assessing viability issues on that site. But how that's then been ported across in relation to R2 is not clear to us at all. That doesn't appear in the papers unless we've missed it.
Okay. Okay. Do you want to comment on that, and then I'll go and have another look at R2. But we'll leave it there for now and move on to R3. But would you like to just comment about how the conclusions were pulled across?
The conclusions are pulled across in terms of the indicative site capacity in relation to the density and the numbers, and that's explicitly set out in the pro forma. The viability is obviously a more general view, and we've taken a proportionate approach to consideration of this. And I think one of the things that goes back to is the conversation we had yesterday about whether we should be using approximate or not. We have used approximate, so if a scheme came forward with slightly fewer dwellings because that was more appropriate for the site, that takes account of that, and that's why it was approximate at this stage, because we hadn't done for each and every site that level of detailed work. We've done a high-level analysis to satisfy ourselves that they are deliverable.
Thank you. Okay.
And what I would say is that looking at the settlement capacity study, A lot of the buildings around in that location are 4 stories, and that obviously informed the number of the plans. In relation to the comment that was made about it's new, it was actually included in the draft local plan in 2016, so it's been a proposed allocation for some time.
So pages 4 and 5
In relation to parking pressure, that's why we've included in Appendix 6 contributions to be sought for implementing controlled parking zones, precisely to reduce the parking pressure on the neighbouring streets from any additional homes in the area, and to make provision for car clubs and car sharing as alternative arrangements, so that residents of the new homes would not be given parking permits to park on the surrounding streets.
Thank you. Okay, I want to move on now, if we can, to R3. Is that okay? Did you have... Councillor Neville?
I was just going to say there are already parking restrictions in those roads that Mrs Bloom Cooper met, and there are major parking problems despite that.
Thank you. Okay, let's move on now to R3. Again, I just want to clarify that the specific points that I had, and then we'll move over again to express your concerns. So I just had a question, first of all, on the deliverability of the site within the timescales suggested. This is from the trajectory point of view. So I think your statement had indicated that leases are due to end within 5 to 10 years. And so I just wondered whether this was consistent with the site being available between 2021 and 25, which is 2 to 6 years. My question is, whatever discussion we have today, when is this site expected to begin delivering, and is this realistic in light of the current uses upon it?
Yes, thank you, Madam. Originally, when we undertook the site selection process, we thought it could be made available between 2021 and 2025, as you've outlined. However, we have taken a new look at that, and if you look at the Housing Implementation Strategy Update, EB410A, taking account of the different lease arrangements, and including the commercial leases, we now think the delivery of the site is not going to come forward as quickly, and it is now proposed for the 2032-33 in the current trajectory, which is attached to the Housing Implementation Strategy.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. That clarifies that. And then... Yes.
Thank you. Land Registry search has said that at least 4 of the properties on that site are 125-year leases. So that would be would be out of the plan period. One of them is 2026, so I think that probably that falls within the period, but there are 4 flats which could potentially fall out of the period unless the council goes through an expensive way of buying those properties out.
Thank you.
I mean, it may be helpful to have some more detail from the District Council on that. The length of the leases is a matter of public record, and a note from the Council on when the leases end and what the proposals are, if there's a difficulty in relation to any of them, would be helpful for you might think, in understanding whether the site is actually deliverable.
Did the council want to make any comments on that?
Well, the test is obviously developable, given that it's at the end of the plan period, not deliverable. The information that we've received from our colleagues in the asset management who manage this property is that is realistic.
So you're saying the question would be really over the whole plan supply rather than the 5-year supply? That's obviously still an issue to be considered. Okay, thank you. Okay. So Can we move on from the lease questions? I want to answer the questions I've got on my agenda, and then you can raise any other points that you have. So just to clarify, first of all, that the council is proposing to modify Part B and Appendix 6 to clarify that the existing 24 residential units are to be re-provided in addition to the 15 new homes proposed. I think that was one of my original concerns, is what's going to happen to everybody who's there at the moment. But the intention is for the existing units to be re-provided. So,
yes, re-provided rather than retained was our understanding. So there's an issue as to what will happen to them pending development, and also whether they'll be coming back afterwards.
Right. Okay.
And yes, re-provided, so they're going somewhere, but the impact on the businesses in particular will still be quite severe. If you're temporarily locating them to a new location, will they survive in that location? Where is it going to be? And as for the flat owners or the flat dwellers, some of them are integral part of the community. It's going to be a major upheaval for them just to be moved. And can the council fulfil that need with its currently long waiting list?
Can you just give me a little bit of an idea of what the nature of this site is? I might have asked for that already, but is it private housing? Is it social housing?
It was originally built in the 1960s, mainly as social housing. Most of it, I believe, the council still has the retained, but there are some leaseholds. So they bought the council out to be a leasehold. And obviously the shops, there are 4 shop units were put in there. 2 of them are very long-standing businesses, the laundrette and the cycle shop. And all 4 are very thriving businesses, and it's not as if this site needs redeveloping to make it more economically viable. It's very economically viable as it is.
Yep.
Thank you. Yes, I'd just like to concur with my colleague on this. This is not a site where any of the properties are in any state of disrepair, far from it. And nor do we have businesses which are struggling as many high street businesses are. These are very vibrant businesses and properties which are in a good state of repair. And so I personally struggle to see why you would demolish something for such a small gain.
Okay, could the council answer that specific question in light of what you've heard? Doesn't seem to be that there's anyone calling out for the redevelopment of this site.
I think the council saw it as a medium density site and in a sustainable location in order to fulfil the strategy of ensuring that where possible existing town centre and non-green belt sites were used first. This was an opportunity to increase the density in a very sustainable location.
Thank you. Thank you.
So we've dealt with this a little more fully in our hearing statement. I won't repeat all of that, but I just wanted to emphasise that the businesses serve important functions for the local community, particularly the local community with mobility issues. And so moving them during construction will be problematic for those who use them frequently. And if they are moved, the question is, well, where would they be moved while the site is redeveloped? And the District Council doesn't provide an answer to that in their hearing statement. The only possibility would be, it seems to us, Queen's Road, but it's not clear how these businesses could function in that location, even in the short term. And so the impact on the useful local businesses on this site would be very negative during construction, even if it were to be an acceptable development in the long term. And the same issue with the existing residents on site. it's not keeping the existing units as we understand it, it's redeveloping the whole site in order to have a net gain of 15 units. So there's a lot of disruption to a useful existing site in good repair for net gain of 15 units.
Thank you. Yep. Okay. Mr. Neville.
I would also add that on top of what Council has said, IG9 Cafe is the only cafe on the east side of Buckhurst Hill. You move it potentially into Queen's Road, there are numerous other cafes, and it will face much stiffer competition and potentially will go under. But because of its situation where it is now, it is a very viable business.
Thank you. Thank you. So the council come back.
So the intention would be to re-provide the retail floor space, and any phasing and temporary arrangements we have set out in the Appendix 6. They will need to demonstrate how they're serviced and brought forward. If I draw your attention to what it says, development proposals will be required to incorporate replacement local retail provision on the ground floor of the development. Any planning application should demonstrate how such retail floor space will be serviced. So there's no intention to not, and I think that's a matter just of phasing and how the scheme is brought forward.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else on R3? I mean, I have another question on the agenda about high-rise development, but I think we've already considered that in relation to the other site. As I said, I'm going to go and I've been to R1. I've probably driven past, but I'll go and have another look at both of these.
So there are two issues. There's the high-rise issue and also the viability issue. I dealt with the evidence in relation to viability on R3 when I was talking about R2, and so it isn't quite as generic as R2. There is some specific consideration of it, but at a very high level of generality. And again, this is a complex site where what is being sought is to retain the existing parking and increase it. And to increase the number of dwellings. So that it presents viability challenges, and they've not been looked at in any detail by the council. On the high-rise development point, there's a particular issue here. So it's not just to do with buildings within the local vicinity, but there's an important local view. And I wonder if I might just hand over to Councillor Williamson to explain that.
Just very briefly, one of the most iconic views in Buckhurst Hill is the view going down Queen's Road across the Roding Valley. And by increasing the height of that development, it would certainly detract greatly from the view. And also the other way from Chigwell driving into Buckhurst Hill, down Roding Lane, Queen's Road sticks out as certainly at night and during the day. It's one of those views that everybody cherishes in the area. Thank you.
And just to finish off on that, in relation to high-rise development, the District Council has made clear in its statement that it considers that it's demonstrated that the high-rise development would not be necessary. So given the importance of the view, it would seem like a sensible modification if the site comes forward. Obviously our position is that it shouldn't, but if the allocation is retained, then high-rise development should be specifically prevented by policy on the site in order to retain the importance of the view and also effects on neighbouring properties.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any final points from the council?
Just to say that the capacity study did take account of the view in the visualisation that you will see within that study, and it's a 4-storey building that's being proposed.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Any final points? No, okay. Thank you. No, that's fine. That's fine. No, that's fine. Thank you. Helpful points. Thank you. We'll come back at 2 o'clock. North Ward Bassett.